Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales. Chapter 49:11. 3 days later. As the intermediate relic was about to open, the surrounding underground creatures became more and more frequent. This made the experts of the other races feel miserable. Basically, everyone had to face more than double the number of underground creatures than before. But for Kong Xinmu, this was a very good thing. Over the past 3 days, Kong Xinmu had devoured the power of the relic from at least 100 underground creatures. For Kong Xinmu, the harvest could be said to be huge. Among them, 7 of them possessed the power of the darkness-attributed relics. For Jiang Shenwu, this allowed his cultivation of the 9th stage Extreme Dao Roaring Dragon Explosion to increase by a large margin. However, to break through to the peak of the 9th Extreme Tao Hui Dragon Explosion, he was still a little short. A few more would be enough. As Kong Xinmu thought about this, he was a little distressed. He had now discovered that these underground creatures had the power of the relic with all attributes. However, the power of the relic with the dark attribute was really rare, and the proportion was relatively low. Among the more than 100 underground creatures, Kong Xinmu had also devoured some power with strange attributes. Although he did not obtain the power of the heaven-deficient demonic ice-fire dragon, Kong Xinmu had still devoured a lot of this kind of obscure inheritance power. Among them, there was no lack of the power of the relic with profound attainments in space, which made Kong Xinmu's understanding of space improve again. Now, if Kong Xinmu switched to the power of void inheritance, his strength would also increase a lot. However, the power of void inheritance was considered an auxiliary inheritance for Kong Xinmu, so his cultivation would be twice as slow as the inheritance of the Dragon God clan and the Demon God clan. Without the power of devouring, it would be impossible for Kong Xinmu to cultivate so many inheritances at the same time. Of course, without the power of devouring, it would be impossible for Kong Xinmu to cultivate so many inheritances at the same time. Of course, without the power of devouring, it would be impossible for Kong Xinmu to cultivate so many inheritances at the same time. Even cultivating the inheritance of the Demon God clan might cause his body to explode and die. After all, without the devouring space, Kong Xinmu's body contained the inherited powers of the Dragon God clan and the Demon God clan. These two powers would clash with each other, which was why other cultivators couldn't cultivate 2 inherited powers at the same time. A human's body would not be able to withstand 2 types of power of this level. Hence, Kong Xinmu's cultivation of these 2 legacies became rather strange and powerful in the eyes of many people who knew about it. Of course, only some of the higher-ups of the Demon God race knew about this. Those who were close to Sui knew about it. It had been a long time since Kong Xinmu had seen Sui, and he missed this young girl very much. It was a pity that the current Kong Xinmu was still a distance away from seeing Sui. Kong Xinmu thought that if he wanted to see Sui, he would have to at least gain the approval of the majority of the Demon God royal family. At the end of the day, it still required strength that could affect the fate of the 2 races. Only then would the Demon God race accept their little princess being together with the genius of the Dragon God race. Otherwise, this kind of union between cultivators of the 2 races would basically be stopped by the higher-ups of the various races. Of course, if someone at Murong Liani's level wanted to be together with Kong Xinmu, the obstacles would be very small. After all, Murong Liani's strength was too strong, and her talent was extremely terrifying. She had already experienced nirvana once at such a young age, and the key was because of Kong Xinmu. What did this mean? It meant that Kong Xinmu and Murong Liani were a match made in heaven. Hence, if they wanted to be together, the Dragon God race and the ancient Phoenix clan would not have any objections, and they would even try to play matchmaker. But now, the Demon God race was in a bit of a difficult situation. At least from the information that Sui occasionally revealed, Kong Xinmu knew that Sui was now under house arrest in the Demon God race's palace. Kong Xinmu's talent had now been revealed, and for the Demon God race's royal family, some of Kang Shinmu's suggestions were even more important, as they could greatly increase their overall strength. But Sui was still too weak. For the demon god race, they probably did not want such an unbalanced marriage. At least, they had to train Sui so that the gap between her and Kang Shinmu would not be too big. When the mid-level relic was about to open, the underground creatures became even more rampant. The surrounding cultivators of the other races basically shrank back into the circle. They were preparing to conserve their strength for the opening of the mid-level relic. Hence, many Supreme God-level experts and Supreme experts even began to deal with the Emperor-level underground creatures that had slipped through the net. When these Supreme powerhouses made a move, they were basically slapped to death with a single slap. However, this also distracted them. When they were dealing with the Supreme underground creatures, they encountered some trouble. Of course, it wasn't a big problem. If they couldn't even solve this problem, they wouldn't have been sent here to protect the elites of the various races. But there was only one person who was still on a killing spree in the field, and that was Kang Shinmu. There are only 2 hours left. Why hasn't he come back to rest yet? I remember that in the past 3 days, he has not rested for even a moment. Others would have a good rest after fighting for 2 to 4 hours, but this kid. Could it be that this guy has some deep hatred with these underground creatures? He is actually so hardworking when killing the underground creatures. Many people were a little puzzled as they watched Kang Shinmu killing the underground creatures. But there were also some people who began to ponder when they saw the state of Kang Shinmu killing the underground creatures. It was mainly because of the 40 elites of the Bone Royal family and the Polaris tribe. Their combat strength was very strong, and their ability to think was also very strong. Otherwise, they could not have become true geniuses. When they saw Kang Shinmu hunting the underground creatures, they could roughly understand that hunting these underground creatures seemed to be beneficial to Kang Shinmu. As for Kang Shinmu, the people of the Bone Royal family did not care much about him. They also did not inquire about the results of the arena battle that happened in the Dragon Martial Continent not long ago. However, the Polaris tribe received a reminder from the Star God clan about the current strength of Kang Shinmu and Murong Liani. However, for the Polaris tribe, it seemed that they did not care too much about this reminder. Now, the elite experts of the Star God inheritance of the Polaris tribe were a little puzzled as they watched Kang Shinmu continuously killing the underground creatures. They suspected that Kang Shinmu would definitely get some improvement by killing these underground creatures. But the improvement could not be too big. Otherwise, wouldn't Kang Shinmu be invincible now? Chapter 49:12. There was no need to mention how good Kang Shinmu's condition was. Even during the battle, the power of the relic that he continued to devour had already made him extremely resistant to various elemental powers. After entering the relic, no one else could compare to Kang Shinmu's condition. It could be said that Kang Shinmu's current condition was even better than when he was at his peak. The longer the battle lasted, the stronger Kang Shinmu's combat power became. Just as Kang Shinmu arrived at this place, after killing hundreds of underground creatures for 3 consecutive days, the middle-grade relic was finally about to open. The supreme experts of each race spread out and blocked in 6 different directions. Then, under the leadership of the supreme experts, the others came to the door of the middle-grade relic. The door of the middle-grade relic was a crystal door that was embedded in the stone wall. It looked beautiful, but for the time being, no one could tell what race's ancestral relic it belonged to. The discovery of this middle-grade relic was due to a demon god expert digging a stone wall. It did not look like it was naturally formed, and there was a powerful protective array formation on the stone wall. This made him dig along the stone wall in a direction, and he finally dug out this crystal door. There were a total of more than 150 people from the demon god race present, but some of them were not qualified to enter. As for how the qualifications were divided, it was calculated according to the number of underground creatures they had killed in the previous period. Those who killed the least underground creatures were not qualified to enter this middle-grade relic. As for the distribution of the demon god race's internal members, Kang Xinmu and the others naturally did not care. Anyway, Huang Yun and Su Yi were definitely on the list of explorers. At this time, the middle-grade relic was about to open. Above the crystal door, there was a dense mist emitting a unique relic power. It looked a little like space power, but it was uncertain if it was space power. The power of this middle-grade relic appeared in front of everyone for the first time, causing them to whisper. This seems to be space power. The rewards and treasures obtained are likely related to space. That's right, it seems so. However, no one knows if this is the case before entering. That's right. These ruins have different external and internal changes. If you don't really enter it, no one will know what kind of power is inside. Everyone discussed animatedly and reached a general consensus. He couldn't assume that the test in the ruins was related to the space attribute just because it appeared to be space attribute power. Perhaps it was just a facade, used to confuse people. In the past, some races had discovered a ruin and decided to enter it based on the appearance of the ruin. Later on, they discovered that the inside of the ruin was completely different from the appearance. This completely ruined their plans and even caused them to suffer some losses. Hence, even though the intermediate ruins displayed the power of space, no one did anything about it. The people who were supposed to enter the ruins remained the same. Kang Xinmu stayed with the girls. Have you improved during this time? Kang Xinmu asked Shangguan Dai. A little, but not much. Shangguan Dai nodded, blinking as she said, I have specially chosen spatial attribute subterranean creatures to kill, and I have gained some inspiration from their usage of the spatial attribute. If I study them carefully, perhaps I can gain a deeper understanding of the spatial attribute. Of course, with my current combat power, I'm afraid there won't be much improvement. That's not bad. Chu Yueqiang smiled elegantly and said, I also chose ice attribute underground creatures to kill, but I didn't gain any insight. Maybe it's because I killed too few. I improved a lot. Tan Shouzhua laughed loudly at the side and said, the bodies of these underground creatures contain pretty good earth-attributed energy. It gave me a new comprehension of the superior grade divine spirit dragon martial technique that I cultivate. I do not know if my combat prowess has increased or not, but I definitely feel stronger than before. Upon hearing this, Kang Xinmu felt relieved. It seemed like killing these underground creatures was beneficial to everyone. However, with Kang Xinmu's devouring power, the efficiency of devouring the power of the underground creatures became higher. Perhaps if Kang Xinmu devoured the power of the underground creatures, the effect would be equivalent to the harvest of killing dozens of underground creatures. This allowed Kang Xinmu to improve more than others. Although some geniuses of the demon god race had been killing for months, the improvement that Kang Xinmu had obtained in the past 3 days was probably much more than those geniuses of the demon god race. Gu Xinyue did not say anything. She listened to Kang Xinmu chatting with the others and maintained a charming smile. She stood next to Kang Xinmu, and it was obvious that her relationship with Kang Xinmu was closer. Kang Xinmu did not feel anything about this. In short, Kang Xinmu's feelings for Gu Xinyue were a little vague and dreamy. This beauty had used the talent power of the nightmare illusory dragon to get to Kang Xinmu previously, which made Kang Xinmu feel that it was not real. This made Kang Xinmu quite depressed. Why was it always when he was unconscious? Putting this aside, the intermediate ruins were about to open. He did not know what kind of test there would be in the intermediate ruins. Before entering the intermediate ruins, Kang Xinmu had received a more systematic lesson on exploring ruins. Among the ruins of the chaotic battlefield, be it intermediate ruins, advanced ruins, or the more powerful super ruins, there were several types of tests. For example, the supreme ruins of the heaven-deficient demonic dragon of ice and fire that Kang Xinmu had experienced before was the most common type of competition. Some treasures would appear in these kinds of ruins, and there would be several groups of cultivators around the treasures. These cultivators would compete for these treasures. This was the most common type. About 5 out of 10 ruins were of this type. However, there were other types besides this type of competition. For example, there were some that were checkpoint type. In this type of relic, every practitioner who entered would challenge the checkpoint set by the owner of the relic alone. Whoever could pass more checkpoints would get better rewards. Chapter 49:13. No one knew what kind of test this intermediate relic was for. However, all the elite cultivators who were about to enter this intermediate relic were all very strong in all aspects. For example, Shangguan Dai, Not only was her combat ability superior to others of the same level, but she was also very sensitive to the power of space. This kind of Xiaofan would be able to deal with different situations in different situations. Kang Xinmu still paid a little attention to the people from the Bone Imperial family and the Polaris tribe. He found that a few of them were indeed very strong. After 3 days of observation, Kang Xinmu had a preliminary understanding of these guys. Of course, these guys certainly had not brought out all their strength. However, based on their current performance and fighting style, Kang Xinmu could make a preliminary judgment that some of them were relatively strong and some were relatively weak. It was still the same as in the arena battle. If the peak 9th tier Emperor stage cultivators were divided into 3 classes, then the current Kang Xinmu should belong to the 2nd class, the same as Shangguan Dai, and Chu Yueqiang. It was also possible that Kang Xinmu was slightly stronger than the 2nd class, but he definitely had not reached the level of the 1st class. After all, his improvement after the arena battle was not particularly terrifying. In contrast, Huang Yun and Murong Lieni were fully deserving of the 1st class, the strongest class. They were the overlords of the 9th tier Emperor stage, and even Murong Lieni had faintly surpassed this level. Under Kang Xinmu's observation, he found that there were 2 people in the 1st class on the Bone Imperial family side, and the remaining 18 people were all in the 2nd class. The Polaris tribe situation was similar. In terms of overall quality, the Bone Imperial family and the Polaris tribe were indeed much stronger than the Demon God tribe. On the Demon God tribe side, besides Huang Yun, there were 2 other strong people similar to Huang Yun, a man and a woman. Like Huang Yun, they were not members of the Demon God tribe's royal family. Among this group of cultivators exploring the intermediate relic, there was only one person from the Demon God tribe's royal family, Su Yi. However, although Su Yi was very talented, he developed relatively late. He started at about the same time as Kang Xinmu, and his current combat power could not reach the level of the 1st class. Therefore, among the 100 or so demon gods, 3 of them belonged to the 1st tier, while the rest belonged to the 2nd tier. As it was a mid-grade relic in the 7th region, the people chosen by the demon gods to explore this time would definitely not be weaklings. In order to obtain more treasures in the mid-level relic, the demon god race had sent out many elites this time. Putting aside the 1st tier experts, the 2nd tier experts were not as common as cabbages. At least in the arena battles, there were less than 100 2nd tier experts from the 10 major races. But now, there were already 100 2nd tier experts from the demon god race. This showed how much importance they placed on the exploration of this mid-level relic. At the end of the day, intermediate ruins were the most important way to increase the overall strength of a race. It was different from the arena battles. The rewards for the arena battles were fixed and known. To the demon god race as a whole, even if they took all the top 10 spots, it would not affect the overall strength of their race much. But the exploration of this mid-level relic was different. Once they could obtain a heaven and earth sacred treasure, no matter how many layers of engravings there were, the rewards would be much more than the champion of the arena battles. Even if they could not obtain a heaven and earth sacred treasure, the treasures produced in the mid-level relic would not disappoint the entire demon god race. The value of the treasures obtained would definitely exceed the total rewards of the arena battles. And this was the difference between the two. This was also why the demon god race had sent out more than 100 second-tier experts this time. Every one of them was a powerful existence similar to Shangguan Dai. Even in the recent battle against the underground creatures, there were people who were stronger than Shangguan Dai, among those who had been eliminated. Not to mention, if experts of the same level were to fight against each other, it was not easy to say who was stronger. The main thing was that the attributes of the two sides could restrain each other, which would have a great impact on the outcome of the battle. In any case, the mid-level relic was finally going to open. Everyone rubbed their palms in anticipation. Nearly 200 powerful peak Emperor-level experts were all waiting for the next moment. The Supreme Experts were blocking all the surrounding underground creatures, but the moment before the mid-level relic was about to open, those underground creatures disappeared almost at the same time. Or rather, no new underground creatures appeared from the stone walls. They stopped attacking, because the power that emerged from the mid-level relic made these underground creatures feel fear. Under this feeling, these underground creatures retreated. Although the underground creatures were essentially born by absorbing the power of the various relics around them, when any relic was opened, once they got close, the power in their bodies would be absorbed by the power of the opened relic. This would cause these underground creatures to lose their power and turn into the most basic rock and metal. Although it was not understood why this was happening, this phenomenon was as if the power of the relic in Kang Shinmu's body had been swallowed up. In this regard, Kang Shinmu did not think too much about it. He held his breath and stared in the direction of the gate of the mid-level relic. When the gate opened, a white ball of light appeared in front of everyone. This ball of light contained the power of the space attribute. It was the supreme power of the void. Feeling the power of the void spreading around, the cultivators near the gate of the mid-level relic all became nervous. With a bang sound, the supreme powerhouses gave an order. The experts of the demon god clan went first. This was because this was a mid-level relic discovered by the demon god clan. However, the experts of the demon god clan also went in batches. Kang Shinmu, Murong Lieni, and the others, a total of 10 people from the dragon god clan and the ancient phoenix clan were also in the first batch. Of course, Suyi was in the same team as Huang Yun and was in the first batch. The first batch had a total of 20 people, including Huang Yun and Suyi from the demon god clan, as well as 8 other 9th-level imperial experts of the second tier, 5 dragon martial artists, and 5 ancient phoenix clan experts. The 20 people flew directly toward the white ball of light at the entrance of the mid-level relic. Before they got close to the ball of light, they condensed their combat forms. No one knew what would happen after entering the relic, so they had to be fully prepared. Kang Shinmu transformed into a black dragon and took the lead. He led Shangguan Dai, Gu Xinyue, and the others directly into the white ball of light. Chapter 49-14. What appeared in front of Kang Shinmu was a very hazy space. About 100 feet away, there was a scene of fog. It looked like everything was white and he could not see what was around him at all. This situation made Kang Shinmu extremely vigilant. His black dragon body was now completely submerged in the white fog and he could not even see his dragon tail. He could only see less than half of his dragon body. However, he had the sensitive perception of the ink centipede beast. At this moment, he could clearly feel that there seemed to be a strong existence in the surrounding fog. That existence felt like a space attribute creature, or maybe it was not a creature. In short, that existence had the power of the space attribute void. In this white fog, it suddenly disappeared and suddenly appeared, but it did not appear in front of Kang Shinmu. Could it be to capture that thing? Kang Shinmu thought to himself and had a little plan. He keenly sensed the pattern of that thing's appearance, and then after about half an incense stick's time, he suddenly erupted with the wind shadow flowing flash, and then the 9th stage extreme roaring dragon burst, exploding in the white fog. Now, Kang Shinmu was skilled and bold. In this intermediate relic, he would not encounter an existence that he could not resist, so he took the initiative and did not continue to wait. This time, he felt that his 9th stage extreme roaring dragon burst hit something, and then that thing suddenly exploded in front of him. All this happened so quickly that Kang Shinmu did not even know what he had exploded. But then, the scene in front of him suddenly changed. He left the area shrouded in white fog and came to a crystal tower. This crystal tower was an extremely spacious space. What appeared in front of Kang Shinmu was a human statue with many strange and mysterious patterns carved on its surface. When Kang Shinmu appeared in this crystal tower space, he saw that he was surrounded by crystal-like walls. The walls were dense with the power of the space attribute void, making it feel like this place was in an unstable space. Kang Shinmu's attention was quickly focused on the human-shaped statue in the middle. The human-shaped statue was engraved with mysterious patterns that contained a very strong spatial attribute void energy, causing one to feel an unparalleled sense of space. Kang Shinmu looked around but did not see any other dragon warriors or demon god race cultivators. However, he still maintained the necessary vigilance. The white mist just now is probably the first test, or rather, the ticket to enter this intermediate relic. Kang Shinmu began to speculate. Only by accurately hitting the flickering existence in the white fog would one be qualified to enter the intermediate ruins. As for Kang Shinmu, he was already inside the intermediate ruins. There were probably not many people who could sense the existence of that thing in the white fog and accurately hit it. Firstly, it required an extremely sharp perception. Secondly, it required an extremely fast speed. Thirdly, it required a sharp judgment. None of these 3 points could be omitted. In short, those who were qualified to enter the intermediate ruins were probably the best among the 9th-level martial emperors. Even if the others were chosen and obtained the opportunity to enter, they would probably be eliminated at the first round of the ticket. Kang Shinmu's guess was correct. After all, he had the consciousness of the demon god ancestor and the black dragon in his mind. One was the body of a 16-winged heavenly demon god, the source of inheritance of the demon god race's royal family. The other was even stronger than the 16-winged heavenly demon god. Although they were not familiar with the supreme relics of the chaotic battlefield, they could roughly guess some of the contents. Kang Shinmu now appeared in the space of this crystal pagoda. The body of the black dragon did not look big in this crystal pagoda. The human-shaped statue in the center was thousands of feet high and looked much bigger than Kang Shinmu. After Kang Shinmu arrived, there was no abnormality in this crystal pagoda. After another half an hour, the space beside Kang Shinmu suddenly flickered, and then a figure appeared in front of him. It was the demon god race powerhouse who had transformed into the body of a 16-winged heavenly demon god, Su Yi. Su Yi was a member of the demon god race's royal family. He was considered a major force participating in the exploration of the intermediate ruins. No one expected him to appear next to Kang Shinmu. "Hey, Kang Shinmu, where is this?" The moment Su Yi appeared in this space, the slender body of the 16-winged heavenly demon god looked around with a somewhat puzzled look. Finally, his attention was focused on the human-shaped statue in the center. "I don't know. I just hit something in the white fog, and then I came here." Kang Shinmu shook his head and said. Before Su Yi could say anything, there was a sudden flash of white light not far away from them. What appeared in front of them was a bone dragon condensed from eerie white bones. This bone dragon was obviously an expert of the bone royal family. At this moment, this bone dragon appeared, crouching on the ground with an extremely vigilant look. As soon as it appeared, it emitted a dense power of ice, causing the temperature of the entire crystal pagoda to drop to a critical value. Even some of the water vapor in the palace began to freeze. When this guy appeared, Kang Xinmu and Su Yi became vigilant at the same time. They moved closer to each other and stared at this guy. The inheritance of the Bone royal family could condense any form of body with the power of the Bone Emperor's inheritance. The Bone Dragon was one of the stronger ones. This kind of Bone Dragon's power was somewhat similar to that of a dragon warrior, but it seemed to carry some power of death and corrosion. It was more strange and unpredictable than that of an ordinary dragon warrior. When the Bone Dragon appeared, it immediately noticed Kang Xinmu and Su Yi. This guy did not make a sound, but quietly retreated to the side and carefully observed the surroundings at the same time. The situation in this Crystal Pagoda Palace was clear at a glance. Apart from the Crystal Pagoda, there was only Kang Xinmu and Su Yi. There was nothing else that looked suspicious. Hence, the Bone Dragon focused all its attention on the statue. Obviously, this statue was likely to contain the secret of this intermediate ruin's treasure. And Kang Xinmu and Su Yi were likely to be its competitors. Of course, they could also be its collaborators. Chapter 49:15. Everything depended on the type of test of this intermediate relic. In fact, this expert of the Bone Royal tribe had a lot of experience in exploring relics. Looking at the current scene, he felt that this would be a cooperation test. It depended on how many people were needed to start this cooperation test. In this Crystal Palace, there were 3 people, Kang Xinmu, Su Yi, and an expert of the Bone Royal tribe. Kang Xinmu and Su Yi chatted in a low voice while paying attention to the situation around them. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, 2 white lights suddenly appeared in the Crystal Palace. These 2 white lights appeared at the same time, which meant that 2 people were directly teleported into this Crystal Palace. 2 more. One from the Polaris tribe, and the other one is actually her. Su Yi glanced at the scene in the 2 white lights and could not help but feel a little surprised. Of the 2 experts that appeared, one was the expert of the Polaris tribe. This person was shrouded in the shadow of the star god, shining with the brilliance of the stars. The other person turned out to be Gu Xinyue. To be honest, Kang Xinmu did not expect that Gu Xinyue would come to this space. After all, in terms of probability, there should be more people from the demon god tribe. But this was probably due to luck. Since there were people on their side, it was much easier. Of course, among the 5 people, there were 2 outsiders. This was a little uncomfortable. One was from the Bone Royal tribe, and the other was from the Polaris tribe. These 2 guys must be on guard at all times during the battle. After Gu Xinyue and the expert of the Polaris tribe appeared, they quickly observed the situation in the field. The expert of the Polaris tribe directly approached the expert of the Bone Royal tribe. When they were outside, the Bone Royal tribe and the Polaris tribe had temporarily formed an alliance. When there was no conflict of interest, the 2 sides could work together. Gu Xinyue, on the other hand, did not approach Kang Xinmu directly because she was very vigilant. She had just entered the intermediate relic, so she was not sure if the Kang Xinmu and Su Yi in front of her were the real Kang Xinmu and Su Yi, or if they were disguised by someone else. However, she quickly confirmed Kang Xinmu's identity because her perception was very strong. She could feel the unique devouring power on Kang Xinmu's body. This kind of aura was definitely not something that others could have. Thus, she approached him. The 5 people in the field were divided into 2 teams. They stared at each other in the Crystal Palace. This should be a test of cooperation. I wonder what kind of test we need to complete together. Gu Xinyue whispered. Yes. Kang Xinmu looked at the human-shaped statue in the field. It was still filled with the aura of the void. Could it be that they needed to join forces to deal with this human-shaped statue? Just as Jiang Shenwu was thinking about this, the originally closed eyes of the human-shaped statue suddenly opened all of a sudden. 2 spatial void beams shot out from its opened eyes. One shot at Kang Xinmu, and the other shot at the expert of the Polaris tribe. Watch out! Jiang Shenwu immediately let out a low roar. His entire black divine dragon body immediately switched to the guardian mode, and he immediately used the power of the brilliant ruby stone. A golden light shield appeared in front of him. The void beam that shot at Gu Xinyue was directly blocked by the power of Kang Shinmu's brilliant gem. At the same time, pitch-black devouring power erupted and wrapped around the void beam in an attempt to devour the void energy shot by the other party. Soon, Kang Shinmu discovered that he could indeed devour the void beam that shot out of the human-shaped statue's eyes and obtain an unparalleled sense of the void from it. Only his devouring power could achieve this. At this moment, after devouring the other party's void energy, his sense of the void energy of the human-shaped statue suddenly skyrocketed. On the other side, the expert of the Polaris tribe snorted coldly. His entire body shone with starlight and a terrifying power erupted in all directions. This was an indiscriminate attack that covered an area and spread throughout the entire Crystal Palace. The might of this star god martial technique was extremely terrifying. It actually blocked the beam of void energy and destroyed it. Moreover, it continued to spread and blasted against Kang Shinmu's brilliant gem barrier. Although it wasn't able to shake the brilliant gem, it still consumed quite a bit of its power. This made Kang Shinmu's eyes narrow. This fellow from the Polaris tribe was intentionally testing his strength. If he was just a little weaker, then he probably wouldn't have been able to resist this attack and would have been annihilated here. The starlight swept through the surroundings violently, but it only lasted for an instant. An instant later, all four of them, including Kang Shinmu, had resisted this attack. The starlight that swept through the surroundings naturally enveloped the human-shaped statue as well. However, the human-shaped statue that was covered in lightning didn't seem to have suffered any harm. It finally raised its huge hands and slapped them towards the floor of the Crystal Palace. A wave of spatial energy instantly appeared beneath everyone's feet and condensed into a spatial vortex. This spatial vortex condensed extremely quickly, and the five of them were practically unable to react in time. All five of them were struck at practically the same time, and then white light flickered before their eyes. It seemed like they'd been pulled into an alternate space. Kang Shinmu was rather familiar with this feeling. This was an independent alternate space. He was surrounded by a mixture of black and white light. The others had vanished, and he was the only one left in the spatial vortex. Spatial energy assaulted him incessantly from within the spatial vortex, but Kang Shinmu was able to rely on the divine dragon tyrant body technique to defend himself. Moreover, Kang Shinmu didn't stop devouring the energy around him during this entire process. As he continued to devour the spatial void energy around him, his perception and comprehension of space had practically reached a critical point. The grade of my void energy inheritance is about to increase. When Kang Shinmu thought of this, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After all, under these circumstances, the increase in the grade of his void energy inheritance wasn't really that important. Most importantly, it was very difficult for him to display his void energy inheritance in battle. He could only attack when he was certain that there was no one else present. Therefore, this was his hidden technique. Of course, it was also a good thing that his hidden technique had become stronger. At the very least, once the grade of his void energy inheritance increased, the might of his void black hole and void judgment would become even stronger and more terrifying. However, now wasn't the time to talk about this. Very soon, Kang Shinmu devoured and defended himself at the same time. After about 15 minutes, the spatial vortex finally vanished. Chapter 49:16. After being swallowed by the space vortex, Kang Shinmu was constantly being attacked by the space vortex. Although these attacks were not strong, the continuous attacks that lasted for an incense stick of time would still make people physically and mentally exhausted. Now, the other four were probably in the same situation. The Polaris tribe expert who had been very violent just now was the same. Now, He was obviously a little dispirited. In the field, a bone dragon had some scars on its body. It looked a little embarrassed, but on the whole, it was not injured. This expert of the Bone Imperial tribe obviously had a terrifying physical strength. The strength of his bone dragon inheritance body was probably not much weaker than that of Kang Shinmu's black dragon body. It should be known that in the Bone Imperial tribe, the Bone Imperial tribe's inheritance body mainly tempered the strength of the bone body, so it was very strong. As for the guy from the Polaris tribe, he was a little uncomfortable. It was very obvious that this fellow's large-scale killing star god martial skill definitely consumed a lot of energy. Immediately after, this fellow was pulled into the spatial vortex. Even though the star power barrier around this fellow's star god silhouette still existed, this barrier was already somewhat broken and on the verge of collapse. This also meant that the guy from the Polaris tribe had consumed more than half of his energy. This caused the expression on this fellow's face under the star god's image to become rather ugly. This meant that in the following operation, he would be at a disadvantage. On the other hand, Jiang Shenwu was brimming with energy. He did not seem to be exhausted at all, and had even gained something. What was wrong with this guy? When the Polaris tribe expert saw that Kang Shinmu was unharmed and full of energy, he felt that it was unfair. Unfortunately, there was no other way. Who asked him to focus on tempering his physical body? In other words, races like the Fu Shui tribe and the Star God tribe, which mainly used the formation of ancient god shadows, found it difficult for them to focus on tempering their physical bodies. After all, they did not have physical bodies, unlike the Dragon God tribe and the Demon God tribe, who could transform into real divine dragon bodies or demon god bodies. They could only condense images of water gods and star gods. These totem images were basically energy bodies, condensed from power. It could be said that they had a certain defensive ability, but their defensive ability could not be stronger than a real physical body. Moreover, restoring the phantoms would consume even more energy from their bodies. Therefore, it was better to directly use defensive methods to block most of the attacks. When they needed to use their phantoms to block the attacks, it would probably be the time when they were about to lose. At this moment, the experts of the Bone Imperial tribe were basically fine. Kang Shinmu was in good condition, and the North Star tribe had consumed more than half of their energy. As for Gu Xinyue and Su Yi, they were still in good condition. They weren't as stable as the Bone Imperial tribe, but they didn't consume too much energy. They weren't as miserable as the Polaris tribe. Once that kind of spatial vortex absorbs someone, it will launch an endless attack that will last for the time it takes for an incense stick to burn. Everyone, be careful not to fall into it again. Gu Xinyue looked around and said to everyone. Then, her attention returned to the human-shaped statue in the center. When the 5 people came out of the spatial vortex, the human-shaped statue had already stood up from the crystal palace, and several strange patterns on its body began to shine with mysterious light. It was the power of the void. These powers gathered together and combined into a terrifying attack, and a terrifying spatial fluctuation appeared in the field. I'm afraid, they won't be able to resist this move. Kang Shinmu's heart suddenly trembled, and his face darkened. Everyone, stand behind me. Under normal circumstances, this move would probably require 5 people to activate their defensive power and stand together in order to resist it. But now, the experts of the Polaris tribe and the Bone Imperial tribe obviously wouldn't trust Kang Shinmu, so it was absolutely impossible for everyone to stand together. If they wanted to resist the attack of the human-shaped statue, they could only leave it to Kang Shinmu alone. He had the power of the Brilliant Rose Stone, and he had just swallowed the power of the Brilliant Rose Stone, so he could completely resist another Supreme God-level attack. Speaking of which, although the power of the human-shaped statue was strong, it hadn't reached the pinnacle of the Supreme God level. Gu Xinyue had the combat power of the Supreme God level 1, but it was true that she was no match for the human-shaped statue. The 5 of them had to cooperate well. Therefore, Kong Shinmu asked the people of the Bone Imperial tribe and the Polaris tribe to stand behind him in a straight line. In this way, Kong Shinmu could block this attack for them. Hearing Kong Shinmu's shout, the experts of the Polaris tribe and the Bone Imperial tribe did not hesitate, and directly flashed behind Kong Shinmu's black dragon body. Then, Gu Xinyue and Suyi also appeared behind Kong Shinmu, sticking close to Kong Shinmu's black dragon body, which was equivalent to protecting him, to prevent Kong Shinmu from being ambushed by the two fellows. At the same time, the powerful power of the human-shaped statue in front of them had finally completely condensed. The human-shaped statue was engraved with some strange and mysterious patterns. The more these patterns lit up, the stronger the attack. Now, a total of 5 patterns lit up, and the endless power of the void condensed, turning into an explosive space ball. The spatial sphere exploded in front of the human-shaped statue and turned into 3 spatial shockwaves that spread out in all directions. Each of these 3 spatial shockwaves could cause the void to resonate with them. The terrifying power was enough to cause despair to rise in one's heart. On the other hand, Jiang Shenwu's brilliant gemstone directly condensed a golden barrier that blocked in front of him. The 3 spatial shockwaves arrived with a loud bang and directly bombarded the brilliant gem's golden barrier. Then, the barrier actually didn't budge at all. Feeling the power of the 3 space impacts exploding out in all directions and sweeping up the entire crystal palace, everyone was a little shocked. However, no one expected that Kong Shinmu could actually rely on his own strength to block this powerful space impact. Moreover, the 3 consecutive space impacts were unable to break the defensive barrier of Kong Shinmu's brilliant ruby stone. This was worthy of being called the brilliant ruby stone, and most importantly, Kong Shinmu's almost endless energy was providing energy to the brilliant ruby stone. Only in this way could the brilliant ruby stone withstand the attacks of the 3 space impacts. Otherwise, it would disintegrate after withstanding one attack. Chapter 49:17. Kong Shinmu blocked the statue's fierce attack with his own strength. The space shock almost shattered Kong Shinmu's brilliant gem barrier. However, the brilliant ruby stone was a brilliant ruby stone. When its full power was unleashed, it could even block a peak supreme god-level attack. Although the space impact of the human-shaped statue was powerful, it was ultimately not at the level of a peak supreme god. However, if it were someone else, it would take a few days to recover after using the brilliant gem. It might not even be able to recover after a few days. However, Kong Shinmu had used his devouring power to devour a part of the opponent's space shock. Not only did it allow the brilliant ruby stone to continue unleashing its power almost immediately, but most importantly, he also had a stronger resistance against the humanoid statue's attack. It was space attribute power. Although Kong Shinmu had devoured a lot of it before, he had not raised his resistance to space attribute power to its peak. However, after this round of devouring, his resistance to space attribute power had finally reached an unparalleled level. The space attribute power would not have much lethality for his current divine dragon body unless the opponent's level was far higher than his. If he was only injured, Kong Shinmu could recover easily and quickly. Both the devouring power and the dark dragon imperial filth technique could help Kong Shinmu recover quickly. When Kong Shinmu blocked the statue's 3 space shocks, Gu Xinyue and Suyi, who were hiding behind him, breathed a sigh of relief. As for the Bone Royal family and the Polaris tribe experts, they also breathed a sigh of relief. In any case, Kong Shinmu had helped them this time. Let's get to know each other. I'm afraid we'll need to work together for a while. The Bone Royal family expert finally spoke. He took the opportunity to rest for a while before saying in a cold voice, "My name is Yuhan. I have an advantage in terms of attack." Hearing the Bone Royal family expert say this, the young genius of the Polaris tribe thought for a while and said, "Quan Tianqing is my name. I specialize in large-scale attacks. Kang Xinmu and the others already knew that this guy was good at large-scale attacks. After all, Quan Tianxin had wanted to give Kang Xinmu and the others a hard time. Unfortunately, he had failed to do so and had used up a lot of his energy. My name is Su Yi, and I'm from the royal family of the demon god race. As for my abilities, I'm more well-rounded. There's nothing outstanding about me. Su Yi introduced himself with a smile. Before Kang Xinmu and Gu Xinyue could say anything, the humanoid statue began to move again. Several mysterious patterns lit up on its body, and these patterns once again condensed the violent spatial attribute void force. From the looks of it, this thing was about to unleash another attack. You should have seen that I specialize in defense. Upon seeing this, Kang Xinmu quickly said in a deep voice, I'm Kang Xinmu. Her name is Gu Xinyue, and her specialization should be in offense. In fact, although Gu Xinyue was very strong in offense, she was stronger in illusions and illusions. After all, she was the Nightmare Mirage Dragon. However, when facing Yuhan of the Bone Royal family and Quan Tianxing of the Polaris tribe, there was no need to tell them the truth. After all, this was just the beginning of their cooperation, so there was no need to tell them everything. After Jiang Shenwu said this, he directly released the Divine Dragon Tyrant Body Technique Strong Offensive Stance. Then, the 9 layers Extreme Dao Hui Dragon Burst erupted and traveled through the void. At this moment, the Phantom Ghost Book's power was fully unleashed. With a flash of golden light, the power of the 9 layers Extreme Dao Hui Dragon Burst directly passed through the void and arrived in front of the humanoid statue. Taking advantage of the fact that the humanoid statue had not launched its next attack, Kang Xinmu struck first. In addition to Kang Xinmu, there were others who had the same idea. Yuhan of the Bone Royal family immediately condensed the power of the Bone King's inheritance and gathered it into countless white bone fangs, forming a storm of fangs that suddenly fell on the humanoid statue. These white bone fangs each carried a corrosive power. Even the current Kang Xinmu felt a trace of threat from them. Soon, these corrosive white bone fangs gathered together with Kang Xinmu's 9 layers Extreme Dao Hui Dragon Burst and bombarded the humanoid statue together. Then, there was a wave of spatial tremors. The spatial tremors rippled in all directions and spread out in 3 waves. Each wave of spatial tremors was stronger than the previous one. Then, Kang Xinmu and the others saw that the humanoid statue was unscathed under their attacks. It still looked as steady as ever. This caused Kang Xinmu's face to darken. Although his attack power was not the strongest among the 9th-level martial emperors, it was definitely not weak. Moreover, there was also the fierce storm of white bone fangs from the Bone Royal family's genius, Yuhan. He did not expect that the humanoid statue would not be harmed in the slightest. Disperse and hide. Then, Gu Xinyue immediately felt the fluctuations in the surrounding space. Her expression changed slightly and she immediately shuttled through the void into the distance. Then, the place where everyone was originally standing rippled with countless spatial vortexes. The spatial vortexes appeared once again. However, compared to the first time, everyone was prepared this time, including Kang Xinmu. When the spatial vortexes appeared, they had already displayed the wind shadow flowing flash and directly escaped into the distance. Even though they were prepared, Kang Xinmu realized that it was still very dangerous for them to avoid the spatial vortexes. They were almost sucked into the spatial vortexes again. Regardless of the outcome of this battle, Kang Xinmu's perception of spatial fluctuations had become more sensitive. Did you notice that the spatial vortexes this time are moving faster than the last time? Su Yi said with some lingering fear as he barely avoided the spatial vortexes this time. That seems to be the case. The North Star tribe's genius, Quan Tianxin, nodded. He seemed to have easily avoided the spatial vortexes, but he was actually very nervous. After all, once he was sucked into the spatial vortexes, his remaining strength might not be enough for him to continue fighting. The others could still be sucked into the spatial vortexes, but he definitely could not. The statue is gathering energy again. Chapter 49:18. This human-shaped statue was engraved with hundreds and thousands of mysterious patterns. Every time a few of these patterns lit up, it was already able to erupt with power that far exceeded the level of Kang Xinmu and the others. It was hard to imagine what kind of destructive power it would have if all these mysterious patterns were to erupt at once. Of course, since this supreme relic was only an intermediate relic, there would basically not be anything too powerful in the relic. This human-shaped statue should not have any attack that surpassed the supreme god level. Every time a few mysterious patterns lit up, it should already be the limit. When the human-shaped statue's second spatial vortex sucked them in, the human-shaped statue continued to gather power. Immediately after, everyone sensed it again. It's another spatial vortex. Kang Xinmu was the first to react. He casually used the wind shadow flowing flash and his entire black dragon body shuttled through the void, instantly appearing thousands of feet away. However, when Kang Xinmu reappeared, he discovered that there was also a spatial vortex at the place where he landed. His expression changed drastically. Before he could react, his entire divine dragon body had already been swallowed by the spatial vortex. At the same time, including Su Yi, Gu Xinyue, Yuhan of the Bone Imperial Tribe, and Quan Tianxing of the North Star Tribe, a total of 5 people, none of them were spared. Although they reacted very quickly, who would have thought that there would be another spatial vortex waiting for them at the place where they landed after shuttling through the void? By the time they realized it, it was already too late. It could only be said that their own understanding of the void was too low. Compared to the methods displayed by the human-shaped statue, the gap was too big. Since there was a second spatial vortex, it meant that the location where Kang Xinmu and the others were shuttling through the void had long been sensed by the human-shaped statue. Otherwise, it would not have been able to condense a spatial vortex at the place where they landed in advance. Fortunately, Kang Xinmu and the others were already quite familiar with this spatial vortex. At the very least, to Kang Xinmu, even if he was sucked into this spatial whirlpool, it would not matter. The void energy attacks in the spatial whirlpool posed almost no threat to Kang Xinmu. At this moment, Kang Xinmu was alone in the alternate space within the spatial vortex. He then released the Divine Dragon Tyrant Body Technique's protective stance, using the Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal's golden light to protect himself from the surrounding void power's invasion. To Kang Xinmu, this ethereal energy was no longer a threat. The spatial whirlpool was not meant to kill them in the first place. It's training our perception of space. This thought suddenly popped into Kang Xinmu's mind. After being sucked into the spatial whirlpool, apart from Kang Xinmu, the others would more or less face some trouble, especially the genius of the Polaris tribe, Quan Tianxin. In order to avoid being sucked into the spatial whirlpool again, after leaving this place, they would definitely be as careful as they could be. With this kind of mentality, it might really be possible to force out some of their hidden potential, allowing their comprehension of the void power to improve by leaps and bounds. Of course, Kang Xinmu did not need this kind of mentality and pressure. Through the devouring power, he had already absorbed all the spatial comprehension contained in the void power into his own body. Although he was not completely absorbing it, if he could continue to devour it like this, Kang Xinmu's understanding of the spatial attribute power would definitely get closer and closer to the human-shaped statue's level. Another incense stick's time passed. Kang Xinmu felt that the spatial whirlpool did not pose any pressure to him at all. However, after coming out of the spatial whirlpool, he looked around and did not know whether to laugh or cry. He saw that apart from him, the other 4 seemed to be in a somewhat sorry state. The Polaris tribe's genius, Quan Tianxin, was in the most sorry state. This fellow's star god projection was already riddled with holes. It was obvious that he was heavily injured. In the spatial whirlpool, he could not even withstand that level of attack. It could be seen that Quan Tianxin was indeed not good at defense. Apart from Quan Tianxin, the other three were about the same. Gu Xinyue's nightmare illusory dragon body, Su Ye's 16-winged heavenly demon god body, and the Bone Imperial family's cold-resistant bone dragon body all seemed to be riddled with injuries, just not as serious as Quan Tianxin's. "Is everyone all right?" Kang Xinmu asked. "Not as good as you." Gu Xinyue glanced at Kang Xinmu and found that his black dragon body seemed to be fine. She immediately clicked her tongue in wonder. Although she already knew that Kang Xinmu's defense was extremely strong, the scene in front of her was still somewhat beyond Gu Xinyue's expectations. This was because Gu Xinyue had just withstood the attacks in the spatial whirlpool. These attacks were at least twice as strong as the first time they were sucked into the spatial whirlpool. However, Kang Xinmu was still safe and sound. It could be seen that Kang Xinmu's defense had completely ignored the threat of these spatial whirlpools. However, what she didn't know was that if Kang Xinmu had been sucked into this level of spatial whirlpool from the beginning, he would probably have been in a rather sorry state. Unfortunately, Kang Xinmu had already devoured enough void power in the previous battle, allowing his resistance to void power to reach the peak. After the five of them came out, Quan Tianxin had almost lost the ability to fight. He had to do his best to recover from his injuries. No one could help him with this. In fact, if this wasn't a test of cooperation, he would have already considered leaving this intermediate relic. If this was a competitive test, he would most likely be the first target to be eliminated. However, now, Quan Tianxin could have a good rest. "You recover first. Leave the rest of the battle to us." Kang Xinmu nodded at Quan Tianxin. After saying this, he turned back to look at the human-shaped statue. "Since this is a test of our cooperation, it means that we must work together to defeat this human-shaped statue. What's the weakness of this human-shaped statue? We must find its weakness. Otherwise, even if there were 100 of us, we wouldn't be able to destroy this human-shaped statue." Kang Xinmu pondered as he spoke. He felt that this human-shaped statue definitely had a weakness. Otherwise, it would be too strong for a peak imperial family like them. The other party's understanding of spatial energy was simply too strong. In that case, let's test it out more. Once we find a weakness, we'll attack it fiercely. Before that, let's not waste too much energy. At the same time, we must maintain 100% vigilance to prevent ourselves from being sucked into the spatial whirlpool again. Chapter 49-19. Su Ye's attack speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, she could launch dozens of attacks. Her 16-winged heavenly demon god body turned into a series of afterimages at this moment, constantly attacking different parts of the human-shaped statue. But every time, her attacks did not have any effect. It was as if the human-shaped statue was an impenetrable fortress that could not be broken. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, the human-shaped statue once again erupted with a terrifying attack. This time, it radiated spatial light beams in all directions. These spatial void power condensed into light beams and exploded in all directions. Each of the spatial light beams contained extremely strong destructive power. Seeing this, Kang Xinmu did not dare to resist it head-on. The main reason was that there was no need for him to use the Brilliance Ruby Stone anymore. That would expose his true strength. The fact that the Brilliance Ruby Stone could still be used must not be known to the Bone Imperial families Yuhan and the Northern Star Tribe's Quan Tianxing. Wind Shadow Flowing Flash. Now that Kang Xinmu had a deeper understanding of the spatial attribute, he was able to flash more easily. In an instant, he traveled through the void and arrived at the outermost area of the entire Crystal Palace. Because the human-shaped statue was located in the center of the entire Crystal Palace and radiated spatial light beams to the periphery, the outermost area was the best place to hide. In fact, as Kang Xinmu had expected, he traveled through the void and arrived at the outermost area of the Crystal Palace. For him, the gap between each spatial light beam was the largest. Under such circumstances, even if his divine dragon body was huge, he could still easily avoid the impact of these spatial light beams. And the others almost had the same idea. Those who could pass through so many trials to arrive at the intermediate relic were definitely not fools. In times like this, they all had their own set of countermeasures. Of course, the basic countermeasure was the same as Kang Xinmu, which was to stay away from the human-shaped statue. The spatial light beams lasted for half an incense stick to burn. Then, the mysterious patterns on the human-shaped statue lit up again. Everyone's expression changed slightly, and they each used their own means, wind shadow flowing flash. Kang Xinmu directly used the wind shadow flowing sunset flash 3 times in a row. Moreover, every time he shuttled through the void, the location of the flash was completely uncertain. Even he himself couldn't determine the location of the flash. He continuously shuttled through the void, and when Kang Xinmu's figure appeared and disappeared, a spatial vortex appeared, and it appeared twice in a row. Kang Xinmu just happened to avoid these spatial vortexes. He then looked around and found that everyone had indeed improved. No one had been sucked into the spatial vortexes. It was just that his true body, which was enveloped by the star god image of the heavenly spring star, looked even paler than before. It was clear that the energy in his body had been severely depleted. I found the weakness. At this moment, Sui continued to attack the human-shaped statue. He suddenly discovered that the human-shaped statue had some weak spots. It wasn't completely indestructible. The shoulder joints and knee joints of the humanoid statue are its weak points. Suye's 16-winged heavenly demon god slid backwards as he spoke to the crowd. 4 weak points. Kang Xinmu narrowed his eyes and looked at the giant human-shaped statue. Sure enough, the 2 shoulder joints and the 2 knee joints of the human-shaped statue were emitting some kind of strange light. He didn't pay much attention to these lights at first, but now that he paid special attention to them, it was obvious that there were some problems. However, my attack alone is useless. Although my attack can cause damage to those places, the recovery speed is too fast. It can almost be completely restored in an instant. Sui added. Why don't we try to attack these 4 places together? Gu Xinyue narrowed her eyes and suggested. Sure, Yuhan. I'll leave the left knee joint to you. Kang Xinmu nodded and then said to Yuhan, the genius of the Bone Imperial family. Yuhan didn't say much. He directly flew towards the human-shaped statue with his bone dragon body and shot out countless white bone spikes at the left knee joint of the human-shaped statue. Kang Xinmu, Gu Xinyue, and Suyi also didn't want to be outdone. They each attacked the designated places. In the next moment, everyone felt the entire humanoid statue tremble from their attacks. Then, the 4 joints that had been attacked began to break and crack. The strange and mysterious light began to try to repair them, but because the 4 joints were broken at the same time, the speed of repair was rather slow. Continue. Kang Xinmu shouted and once again burst out with 9 extreme Dao roaring dragon blast. But it was also at this time that the humanoid statue suddenly emitted the light of even more mysterious patterns. The power of space swept out in all directions, emitting waves of violent space ripples. If these space ripples enveloped people, they would almost be torn to shreds. Kang Xinmu and the others, who were planning to attack a second time, could only retreat when they saw this. Because it was a space ripple attack, the speed of the attack was extremely fast. It would even suddenly appear around them, making it impossible to defend against it. However, after experiencing the threat of the space vortex, under the pressure, everyone's understanding and perception of space attribute void force had improved. At this moment, once the space ripples appeared around them, they could immediately react and travel through the void to avoid them. There was no doubt that after this battle, the 5 of them's perception of void power had greatly increased. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for them to dodge the spatial ripple attack this time. Compared to the spatial vortex from before, the explosion of the spatial ripple this time was the real threat to them. If they made a mistake, they would die. Even Quan Tianxin of the Polaris tribe had overdrawn his own strength to dodge the attacks of the spatial ripples. The space ripple attack, which lasted for an incense stick's time, finally ended. Following that, they continued to attack the 4 weak points of the humanoid statue. At this moment, a terrifying power erupted. Unfortunately, when the spatial ripples attacked, the humanoid statue had already recovered from the damage suffered by the 4 weak points. It was as good as new, as if it hadn't suffered any attack at all. This recovery ability is too strong. Even if it's a weak point, it's still very difficult to completely destroy it, Kang Xinmu thought to himself. At this moment, he raised his head and discovered that the human-shaped statue didn't only have these 4 weak points. This was because the neck of the human-shaped statue was also emitting the same mysterious light as the 4 points. Could the neck be one of the weak points? Chapter 49-20. Quan Tianxing, do you still have strength? Kang Xinmu asked the young genius from the North Star tribe. 5 weaknesses. Now Quan Tianxing seemed to understand the situation he was facing. However, he smiled bitterly and said, I really don't have any strength left. I have used up all my strength just now. However, I can still launch an attack. He looked at Kang Xinmu and smiled bitterly. Kang Xinmu, I know that you seem to have the ability to help others recover their strength. However, I don't need it for now. Let's see if we can get rid of that weakness first. This surprised Kang Xinmu. It seemed like Quan Tianxing knew something about Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu had shown his ability to recover other people's strength in the arena. At that time, he had helped Chu Yueqiang recover her strength several times. He didn't expect Quan Tianxing from the North Star tribe to know about it. However, this was normal. After all, Kang Xinmu was going to participate in the exploration of the intermediate ruins. During the preparation period before the opening of the intermediate ruins, someone must have investigated his information. Regardless of whether the Bone Royal tribe and the North Star tribe valued Kang Xinmu, they had to give him basic information. Kang Xinmu squinted his eyes when he heard what Quan Tianxing said. Quan Tianxing didn't look like he had used up all his strength. It was obvious that he still had some strength left. As for why he pretended to be exhausted and what his goal was, no one knew. In any case, Kang Xinmu was still wary of the Bone Royal tribe's Yuhan and the North Star tribe's Quan Tianxing. It was impossible for him to trust them. Now, they were only working together temporarily. As for why Quan Tianxing didn't want Kang Xinmu to recover his strength, it was understandable. After all, it meant that he would have to open up and accept Kang Xinmu's strength. What if Kang Xinmu did something to him when he was recovering his strength? Therefore, it was impossible for Quan Tianxing to let Kang Xinmu help him. Since you can still move, I will leave the weakness on your neck to you. On the count of 3, we attack together. Kang Xinmu's black dragon form was already circling around the right knee joint of the humanoid statue, constantly looking for an opportunity. The other 3 were doing the same. Gu Xinyue was in charge of the right shoulder joint, Suyi was in charge of the left shoulder joint, and Yuhan of the Bone Royal family was in charge of the left knee joint. Together with Kang Xinmu, they wrapped the knee joint. Finally, the weakness of the neck was handed over to Quan Tianxing. When Kang Xinmu gave the order and counted to 3, the 5 of them attacked at the same time. A terrifying power erupted in the Crystal Palace. Immediately after, everyone felt that the aura of the human-shaped statue seemed to be weakened in an instant. The knee joint was shattered. Shoulder joint, shattered. The weak point on the neck was directly penetrated by the heavenly spring star's starlight beam and exploded. The 5 weak points were hit at almost the same time. Under such circumstances, the aura of the human-shaped statue was directly weakened, completely different from before. Immediately after, the 5 of them saw a small ball of light fly out from each of the 5 weak points of the human-shaped statue. The ball of light had just appeared, but the 5 of them did not feel any threat. Therefore, they each went forward and put the small ball of light into their pouches. This is a dazzling material. Sui glanced at the ball of light and took the lead to say. Mine doesn't seem to be a dazzling material. Kang Xinmu looked at the ball of light caught by the dragon claw and said with some doubt. If it was a dazzling material, they all had similar characteristics, so Kang Xinmu should not be wrong. At this moment, the ball of light caught by Kang Xinmu's dragon claw was actually an elixir. He could feel that this elixir contained incomparably rich spatial attribute essence. This is spatial essence. Gu Xinyue approached Kang Xinmu and looked at his dragon claw. Then, she exclaimed in surprise. However, she said the words spatial essence softly, so no one else could hear her. Spatial essence? What the hell is this? Kang Xinmu was still too inexperienced in certain aspects. He had never heard of this thing, nor did he know what it was used for. Spatial essence is the core of spatial attribute void power. If you can absorb the power within it, it will greatly improve a cultivator's spatial perception. Gu Xinyue said, I obtained a dazzling material. I don't know its specific use, but I can confirm that it is of the spatial attribute. Compared to your space condensed essence, its value is much lower. Did you know? Spatial essence is one of the best cultivation resources for cultivators of the void human tribe. It is almost like our divine dragon marrow, which can help them quickly increase the rank of their void power. These words surprised Kang Xinmu. This thing that looked like a pill was actually called spatial essence. Although it did contain spatial attribute power, Kang Xinmu really didn't feel that there was any power within it that could help him quickly break through with his void power inheritance. Kid, you're too stupid. If you can tell that this thing looks like a pill, then there's naturally a layer of medicine on the outside. Its true essence is all inside. The demon god ancestor chuckled, Kid, if you devour and absorb it, your void power inheritance will most likely increase by 3 levels in one go. It was originally at the 2nd level of the Emperor stage, right? Perhaps you can directly break through to the 5th level of the Emperor stage. Just like your divine dragon marrow. However, this spatial essence isn't considered a top-notch spatial essence. The power contained within it isn't huge. If you absorb it all, you will probably only be able to break through to the 5th level of the Emperor stage. If he really broke through to the 5th level of the Emperor stage as he said, Kang Xinmu's void power cultivation would probably be the same as that of the dragon martialists. Of course, the power from the divine dragon marrow that he had devoured previously had not been completely consumed yet. It was still stored in the devouring space. It was completely enough for him to increase the rank of the divine dragon inheritance blood essence 2 or 3 times. This spatial essence was indeed not as good as the divine dragon marrow that Kang Xinmu had devoured previously. However, how rare was the divine dragon marrow? Apart from those at his level, it was impossible for other young dragon martial artists to absorb the divine dragon marrow. One could imagine that even if the space essence was of a lower grade, it would still be worth more than 100,000 gold coins if taken out. Chapter 49-21. Just like how all the peak level 9 Emperor stage cultivators had come to explore this intermediate relic, almost all peak Emperor stage existences would dabble in space. Otherwise, they would not be a match for other experts of the same level. Once they mastered space, they could fight or retreat, chase or run. Their combat flexibility would increase greatly, and they would be able to make the right choice no matter what kind of complicated situation they were in. Basically, Every race that had reached level 5 Emperor stage and above would start to study space. Of course, as a race that specialized in space attribute power, the void human race's inherited power was related to space. From the beginning of their cultivation, they were able to master and comprehend space. This meant that in the same realm, the void human race's attainments in space attribute power would definitely surpass other races' cultivators. Of course, there were exceptions. But if both sides were geniuses, then this was basically the case. Kang Xinmu did not intend to absorb this space condensed essence for the time being. This thing was very valuable, but it was also very useful to him. He did not know whether he should sell it or not. Anyway, Suyi was watching from the side, and he could not keep it for himself. He could only think about it after leaving. He had to hand over 30% of his gains from exploring the intermediate relic to the demon god race. A ball of light flew out from the 5 broken weak points of the human-shaped statue, and the 5 people each put the ball of light into their respective bags. Kang Xinmu knew that Gu Xinyue and Suyi had each obtained a space attribute dazzling material. As for Kang Xinmu himself, he had obtained a space condensed essence. And what did Yuhan and Quan Tianqing obtain? Kang Xinmu and the others had no way of knowing. Before the items were put into their bags, they were all balls of light, and no one could see what was inside. However, the space-condensed essence that Kang Xinmu had obtained this time should be considered one of the better rewards, right? Yuhan and Quan Tianqing did not say anything, and Kang Xinmu did not bother to ask what they had obtained. At this moment, the 5 people stayed in this crystal palace, wary of each other. No one knew what the human-shaped statue would do next after giving out the reward. Would there be further tests? Would the cooperation test directly turn into a competition test? No one knew about this, so the 5 of them were on guard against each other. Of course, Kang Xinmu didn't need to be on guard against Gu Xinyue. He had 99% trust in Suyi, so he didn't need to worry too much. On the other hand, although Yuhan and Quan Tianqing were allies, it was impossible for them to be as close as Kang Xinmu and the others. After all, Kang Xinmu and Gu Xinyue already had a different relationship. As for Suyi, he was now in a cooperative relationship with Kang Xinmu. It was impossible for him to fall out with Kang Xinmu. Did the demon god royalty not want the method to improve the inheritance of a 16-winged heavenly demon god? After all, Kang Xinmu still had many tricks up his sleeve that could help the demon god royal family. In any case, the 3 people on Kang Xinmu's side were considered to be a group. They were almost like an iron bucket. As for Yuhan and Quan Tianqing, they could only be said to be cooperating on the surface, but they were secretly on guard against each other. After the 5 people were on guard for less than half an incense stick of time, the human-shaped statue suddenly moved again. This time, the various patterns on the human-shaped statue all changed. The originally broken 5 weaknesses all disappeared at this moment. What appeared in front of Kang Xinmu and the others was a brand new human-shaped statue. Moreover, the aura that this human-shaped statue exuded was even more terrifying and powerful than the previous human-shaped statue. Originally, the statue was expressionless, but now, on the face of this humanoid statue, there was a strange smile. It looked as if it was alive, giving off a creepy feeling. The statue has changed. Be careful. Kang Xinmu immediately warned. Immediately after, the surrounding space of the crystal palace suddenly changed. Kang Xinmu felt the surrounding space suddenly shrink, as if the entire space was beginning to condense, squeezing his divine dragon body and exploding in midair. Kang Xinmu subconsciously wanted to use the wind shadow flowing cloud flash to escape from this compressed space, but he soon discovered that in this space, he could not use any spatial abilities at all. Defend. Kang Xinmu's great sorrow heavenly dragon seal directly erupted with golden light, enveloping Kang Xinmu's black dragon body. At this time, Gu Xinyue was very close to Kang Xinmu, and Kang Xinmu also protected her. Brilliant ruby stone. Kang Xinmu felt the compression and condensation of the surrounding space power. He knew that this was the first wave of the new strange statue's attack. It was probably a very strong attack, and he had to resist it. Seems like this is another cooperation test. I wonder how many times the statue will change. Every time it changes, I will get a corresponding reward after I defeat it. Kang Xinmu thought to himself, and he became a little excited about the next task. If this was the case, as long as they defeated enough statues, they would be able to get more than enough rewards. Even the spatial attribute radiant material that Gu Xinyue and the others obtained was worth at least 30,000 gold dragon coins. Because it was a spatial attribute material, it was extremely rare in the market. It could be seen that every time they defeated a statue, they would be able to get a huge reward. This made Kang Xinmu very interested in challenging the statues. But he did not know if other people who entered the intermediate ruins would also be like them, forming groups of 5 to challenge this kind of humanoid statue. The power of Kang Xinmu's brilliant ruby stone emitted golden light, enveloping him and Gu Xinyue together, and directly resisting the compression and condensation of the surrounding space. He looked around and found that the bone dragon's body was very tough, and its body was glowing with a white bone light. Although it appeared to be distorted under the compression of the space, it was not injured. It was obvious that the bone dragon's cold resistance was really strong, and its defense was not inferior to Kang Xinmu's. Of course, if it was not for the fact that Kang Xinmu wanted to protect Gu Xinyue together, he would not have needed to use the brilliant ruby stone. He should be able to defeat it with his own strength, but he was not too sure. This made Kang Xinmu realize that his current strength was probably still some distance away from being able to resist the cold. The bone dragon's cold resistance was very strong, it was just that it had not been shown before. As for Quan Tianqing, he kept saying that he was out of strength, but at this moment, a burst of resplendent starlight erupted from him, squeezing the space outside of his star god projection. The star god projection looked a little battered, but the power that erupted from it was not weak at all, and it directly blocked the compression of the surrounding space. On the other side, Su Ye's 16-winged heavenly devil god body was already compressed by the space, but a layer of pitch-black light condensed on the surface of her body. It was obvious that the existence of this layer of pitch-black light had blocked the surrounding space. Under the compression of the surrounding light, her 16-winged heavenly devil god body looked even slimmer and more attractive. Chapter 49-22. The strange statue's attacks were all blocked by the 4 of them. Then, the mysterious patterns on the strange statue flickered even more spiritedly. Just as everyone was blocking its attacks, the space within the Crystal Palace was actually divided. 5 spatial cracks appeared in the Crystal Palace, directly dividing the Crystal Palace into 5 different sections. 5 different spaces, and everyone has to be responsible for a section? Kang Xinmu immediately thought of this when he saw the situation. At this moment, he and Gu Xinyue were together. When they saw the situation, they looked at each other, nodded, turned around, and separated. Although the space within the Crystal Palace was divided, it seemed that they could still move if they wanted to. For example, Gu Xinyue easily shuttled through the void and arrived at the space adjacent to Kang Xinmu's. As for the others, they each occupied a space. The 5 of them appeared in 5 different directions of the strange statue. I wonder what will happen next. Jiang Shenwu carefully looked at the strange humanoid statue. While guessing the purpose of the Crystal Palace's spatial division, he was also thinking about how to defeat this strange humanoid statue. However, he really did not see any weakness on the strange humanoid statue that was similar to the previous one. Previously, although the weakness of the humanoid statue wasn't obvious, it could still be found if one looked carefully. The light it emitted was different from other parts of its body. But now, this strange humanoid statue was completely integrated, and there was no difference between it and other parts of its body. After the strange humanoid statue divided the entire crystal palace into 5 regions, spatial attribute void power began to condense in one of the regions. This region was the space where Su Yi was. Su Ye's eyes widened as he carefully looked at the condensed spatial void power. He quickly discovered that it was actually condensed into something similar to a summoned creature. From its appearance, it looked like an eyeball. Spatial eye. Let's just call it that for now. The spatial eye condensed from spatial attribute void energy appeared in the space where Su Yi was. Then, it continued to condense void energy all over its body, condensing into a beam of void energy. It seemed like it wanted to attack Su Yi. I can't move. All of a sudden, Su Ye's 16-winged heavenly demon god stopped moving in that space. Her expression turned ugly. Clearly, she did not expect the spatial eye to possess such an ability. It could actually make her unable to move in this space. At this time, it was clear that the other 4 could move, but, when Kang Xinmu wanted to pass through the void and go to Su Ye's side to protect her, he found that at this moment, the power of space in the entire crystal palace had solidified. In other words, at this moment, they could no longer use spatial shuttling, so the area of the crystal palace that had been separated was already an insurmountable moat for them. The master of this supreme relic was a supreme powerhouse when he was alive, so the methods he left behind were naturally not something that Kang Xinmu and the other peak emperor-class cultivators could crack. It seemed that the appearance of the spatial eye and the division of space this time had certain rules. The master of this supreme relic hoped that the cultivators who entered to explore would be able to solve the problem he left behind within these rules. The spatial eye is beginning to condense power. In about half an incense stick's time, it will be able to kill Su Yi in one fell swoop. Kang Xinmu's expression darkened. He did not know Su Ye's specific strength, but Su Yi was clearly not the kind of demon god cultivator who cultivated the physical body. In fact, the advantage of the inheritance of the 16-winged heavenly demon god did not lie in the physical aspect. Therefore, in a situation where he could not move, Su Yi definitely could not block the attack of the spatial eye. If he could not destroy the spatial eye within half an incense stick's time, Su Yi would very likely die here. Right now, we can't pass through the void, and our power cannot cross this divided space. Can we only watch as she is killed? There must be a way. Kang Xinmu kept thinking in his heart. At the same time, he kept observing the situation in the space he was in. The entire crystal palace was divided into 5 spaces. It was definitely not without reason. It was just that no one had yet to find the reason. I found something. At this moment, Yuhan of the Bone Imperial family, who had transformed into a bone dragon, suddenly said. The bone dragon's area was on the right side of Su Yi. At this time, Yuhan, who had transformed into a bone dragon, said directly, "In my area, it seems to be a little different from yours. I have a bright spot here that seems to be connected to the spatial eye in front of Miss Su Yi. This spot of light is on the side of the strange statue, and it just happens to be divided into my area. In other words, only I can destroy this spot of light." Yuhan's voice was cold. It was obvious that he had roughly guessed what kind of danger Su Yi was facing this time. I have experienced many intermediate ruins, and I have seen this kind of test before. Some of the Supreme Ruins owners guessed that the people who entered the ruins might be from different camps, so they specially set up some tests to let people help each other. It's really ridiculous. As practitioners of different races, we fight for our own race. If there is no temptation, who would be willing to help people of other races? When Yuhan said this, Kang Xinmu, Gu Xinyue, and Su Ye's mood sank. What did Yuhan mean? Could it be that this guy wanted to betray them at this time? If he directly killed Su Yi at this time, it seemed that no one else could save him. Kang Xinmu's face darkened. Just as he was about to persuade him, he heard Yuhan suddenly chuckle. "Don't misunderstand, I was just casually saying what I said just now. At least for now, there is no need for us to fall out. Let's work together to have a chance of obtaining more relics and treasures, right? After Yuhan said this, he didn't make any unnecessary movements. He directly attacked. Countless white bone spikes condensed into a whirlwind and directly swept towards the side of the strange statue, smashing a glowing spot of light into pieces. Chapter 49-23. After weighing the pros and cons, Yuhan decided to help Su Yi. After all, no one knew if they would encounter the same situation and their lives would be in the hands of others. As Yuhan shattered the light that was charging the spatial eye in front of Su Yi, the spatial eye seemed to stagnate and its power did not continue to increase. However, before everyone could relax, they saw the energy of the spatial eye begin to increase again. Once the spatial eye grew to a certain extent, Su Yi would probably be killed by the power of the spatial eye. This time, Quan Tianxin of the North Star tribe said bluntly, "That light is in my space. I will shatter it." At this time, Quan Tianxin could be said to have made a good guess about the situation. His position was on the right side of Yuhan. So, first, Yuhan made the decision, then he made the decision. If there was no accident, it would be Jiang Shenwu, and then Gu Xinyue. It could be said that except for Su Yi, who couldn't move, if anyone else wanted Su Yi dead, Su Yi wouldn't be able to live. This was very simple. In such a situation, no one dared to joke around with their own lives. Who knew if it would be their turn later? Therefore, he would help as much as he could. Moreover, if everyone gathered together, there would be strength in numbers, and it would be more suitable for the next operation. In any case, there wasn't any deep hatred between them, and there wasn't even a conflict of interest, so there was no need to kill anyone else. As Quan Tianxin made a move and shattered the light that appeared in his area, then the light that appeared in Kang Xinmu's area also appeared. All of this coincided with everyone's guess. There was no need to say what to do next. When Kang Xinmu shattered the light that appeared in his area, Gu Xinyue also shattered the light that appeared in her area. After the four of them shattered the light, Su Yi said in a deep voice, "I can move, but the spatial eye is still there, and it is still accumulating energy." Everyone's faces were filled with shock. They found that the light that was charging the spatial eye this time was actually above the head of the strange statue. Above their heads was a place that the 5 separated spaces could not reach. It was a forbidden area. In other words, no one could save Su Yi now. However, the difference was that Su Yi could move now. This should be the statue's test for her. As the power of the spatial eye continued to gather, Su Yi also made the most dependable preparations. On one hand, he planned to block the attack of the spatial eye, and on the other hand, he tried to think of a way to destroy the spatial eye. This little girl, compared to you, she is still a little lacking. The strength of this spatial eye is not weak. I'm afraid that she will not be able to withstand it. Can you help her? The demon god ancestor's voice resounded in Kang Xinmu's mind. Kang Xinmu was a little helpless. Right now, I can't pass through the spatial barrier, even my power can't pass through it. I've already tried it just now, how can I help her? Did you forget that you have the devouring power? The devouring power, as long as you use it properly, can completely devour these spatial barriers. The demon god ancestor said matter-of-factly, "Of course, your current level of power is still too weak, and you may not be able to do anything about these barriers. But who told you that you must go through to help her? Listen up, this noble one is a 16-winged heavenly demon god. Right now, these so-called 16-winged heavenly demon god inheritances are really too weak. Although I have already taught them some methods before, I did not let them unlock all of their powers. This noble one, the source of power of a 16-winged heavenly demon god, comes from the 16 wings. To this noble one, the 16 wings, to this noble one, are like your hands and dragon claws. It is something that is inherent to this noble one. Once the seal is unlocked, there will be great power. This process, this noble one calls unlocking the wings. This noble one has tried unlocking the wings a total of 15 times, and the last time, I could not succeed no matter what. This noble one also has some doubts about my bloodline, but let's not discuss this for now. Let's talk about the royal family of the demon god clan. They don't seem to know the method of unlocking the wings at all. That's true, this noble one has left behind many inheritance relics. These royal family of the demon god clan are probably the family that obtained the inheritance from this noble one. My method of unlocking the wings was not recorded in the relics at all. My soul only woke up when I met that little girl. Otherwise, TSK, I would still be sleeping in that so-called sacred relic of the demon god clan. Without further ado, I will tell you about the situation of unlocking the wings. Since the body of a 16-winged heavenly demon god has obtained the inheritance of this noble one, then the power of the bloodline must be obtained. You can try unlocking the wings. The first 4 attempts aren't too difficult, but there is still a considerable amount of danger involved. This is somewhat similar to the ancient Phoenix clan's nirvana. When the wings are unlocked, whatever power is fused into them, the unlocked wings will have that type of power. Now, the power of the Eye of Space is considered quite high. If she can fuse that power into her own wings, then this little girl's strength won't be too weak. Boy, do as I say and teach the first method of unlocking the wings to that little girl. As the consciousness of the demon god ancestor was transmitted to Kong Shinmu, more information regarding the unlocking of the wings appeared in his mind. This information could be said to be a priceless treasure to the royal family of the demon god clan, but it was impossible for Kong Shinmu to divulge all of it. Therefore, Kong Shinmu only intercepted a portion of the information, which was the first method of unlocking the wings, and transmitted it to Suyi through sound transmission. This is the method of unlocking the wings of a 16-winged heavenly demon god. It is very useful for increasing your strength, and in this current situation, it just happens to be suitable for you to use this method. You can use this method to fuse with the power of the Eye of Space and open your first wing. From then on, you will be able to fuse with the power of the Eye of Space, allowing that wing of yours to have an even stronger special ability. As this information was transmitted, Suyi was so shocked that he didn't know what to say. Unlocking the wings? A method to increase the strength of a 16-winged heavenly demon god? Although many people of the royal family of the demon god clan suspected that the demon soul of the 16-winged heavenly demon god had already fallen into Kong Shinmu's hands, there had never been a conclusion, but now, Kong Shinmu actually proposed unlocking the wings. Chapter 49-24. No matter what Suyi was thinking, the most important thing for her now was to practice the technique of unlocking her wings. After all, the situation she was facing now was quite critical. It would be difficult for her to block the destructive power of the spatial eye with her own combat strength. Therefore, the technique of unlocking her wings could be said to be a life-saving straw for her now. Of course, even without this technique, she would not be killed by the attack of the spatial eye. However, it was inevitable that she would be seriously injured. It would be better if she could avoid being injured. The technique of unlocking her wings was not considered complicated. The main thing was that the inherited bloodline of the 16-winged heavenly demon god flowed through several specific pathways in her body. These pathways would not have been discovered if not for the guidance of the original body of the 16-winged heavenly demon god. Of course, the most important thing was to have the idea of unlocking her wings. The current royal family of the demon god did not even know what unlocking wings was. This was why Suyi was so shocked. At this moment, the 16-winged heavenly demon god body that Suyi had transformed into erupted with the power of the demon god. Her entire body was surrounded by pitch-black demonic aura. As the inherited bloodline of the 16-winged heavenly demon god in her body was activated, one of the black wings on her back was directly surrounded by even more dense pitch-black demonic aura. There was even a faint blood-red color. This was the inherited bloodline of the 16-winged heavenly demon god. It was wrapped around that wing. The power of the spatial eye in front of her became more and more overflowing. It was as if endless space attribute void power had condensed into a beam of light. In an instant it swept towards Su Yi. The speed of this beam of light was so fast that no one could react in time. Su Yi subconsciously dodged. She could now move, so she directly traveled through the void and flashed to another location in the space she was in. However, she immediately discovered that the spatial beam of light was directly chasing after her at an extremely fast speed. It was impossible for her to continue dodging. Therefore, the wing on her back that was surrounded by the inherited bloodline of the 16-winged heavenly demon god directly blocked in front of her demonic body. After a loud bang, the space attribute power beam exploded in front of her. However, it was all blocked by her wing. Kang Xinmu nervously discovered that her wing had actually been disintegrated by the beam of spatial energy, and was completely torn apart in the space. But immediately after, Kang Xinmu discovered that the spatial light beam didn't continue to bombard Su Yi. Instead, it seemed to have been imprisoned in that space. Then, Su Ye's shattered wing fragments emitted demonic aura and bloodline power. There was a pitch-black aura lingering around them that wrapped around the spatial light beam. This process seemed to take a long time, but it also seemed to be very fast. Everyone only saw the spatial attribute light beam explode, and then one of Su Ye's wings was shattered. Immediately after, her black and red wing fragments wrapped around the spatial attribute light beam's power, devouring and absorbing it. This was the first time his wings had been unfurled. For the inheritors of the 16-winged heavenly demon god, unlocking their wings was the best way to increase their strength. Unfortunately, the demon god royal family did not know about this. Even so, the 16-winged heavenly fiend celestial royalty of the fiend celestial race was still the strongest tribe among the fiend celestial race. And now, Su Yi had successfully unfurled her wings once. This time, when she unfurled her wings, she attached spatial attribute power to the first wing she unfurled. This power came from the Eye of Space, and the Eye of Space was something left behind by the supreme existence of this mid-level relic. It contained too many supreme experts' understanding of space. The power contained within was not something Su Yi could fully use at present, but the understanding and power within it was a huge improvement to Su Yi. In terms of combat strength alone, it had increased her by at least 30%. If she could fully comprehend the spatial attribute later on, it would not be an exaggeration to say that her strength had doubled. Most importantly, the spatial power that erupted from the Eye of Space was also a great opportunity for Su Yi. In the future, by comprehending the power within it, she would be able to have a deeper understanding of spatial power. It would be of great help to her improvement in the Tao of Space. The impact of this on her was obvious. So now that Su Yi had calmed down, the 16-winged heavenly demon god's body remained in the space, brewing the power of the first wing that she had just fused and unfurled. After a long time, she opened her eyes and looked deeply at Kang Xinmu. This gaze contained doubt, gratitude, and some inexplicable meaning. However, they were quite far apart, so Kang Xinmu could not carefully ponder all the meaning contained in her gaze. The first crisis of the Eye of Space had passed just like that. And this crisis of the Eye of Space seemed to have no follow-up. After the strange humanoid statue erupted with this attack, the 5 separated spaces directly returned to normal, no longer divided into 5 spaces. Next, we should think about how to defeat this strange statue. It doesn't have any obvious weaknesses, but we can try to attack all parts of its body and try to find its weaknesses. If this statue really wanted to kill Kang Xinmu and the others, it could directly annihilate them with one move. After all, it was something left behind by a supreme expert. Therefore, this strange statue definitely had some weaknesses left for them, allowing them to defeat this strange statue and obtain the hidden rewards. The 5 of them did not say anything else and directly began to bombard the strange statue. Kong Shinmu's 9 layers extreme Tao Hui dragon burst did not stop, constantly bombarding various parts of the strange statue's body, but it did not have any effect. Su Yi tried to use the power of the wings that she had unfurled. The part of the power belonging to the Eye of Space made her a lot stronger. At the same time, as she continued to familiarize herself with the power of the wings, her combat strength continued to increase, similar to how she needed to consolidate the grade of her inherited blood essence. In this kind of battle, it could stimulate the speed at which she consolidated her strength. It was not that the strange statue did not retaliate, but it constantly erupted with spatial ripples. The speed was similar to the spatial vortex they had encountered before. If they did not dodge, they would be seriously injured even if they did not die. Chapter 49-25. This kind of power was destructive. Once hit by the spatial ripples, it was not something that a peak Emperor stage expert could withstand. Kong Shinmu felt that even if he used the power of the brilliant ruby stone, he would not be able to withstand the power of the spatial ripples. This was an attack that was truly mixed with the power of a supreme expert. However, this kind of attack was superficial. It was not intended to kill, but to cause trouble for Kong Shinmu and the others. Spatial ripples constantly erupted, so Kong Shinmu and the others had to focus all their attention on avoiding the spatial ripples. After all, if they were hit, they would die. For this, they could only rely on their own perception of space. Fortunately, through the battle with the previous statue, the 5 of them had a much stronger perception of the power of space than before they entered the relic. The ones who improved the most were, of course, Kong Shinmu and Su Yi. Su Ye's improvement was because she had opened her wings, which increased her combat power. Also, because she had integrated the spatial power of the Eye of Death, her perception of space was at least twice as strong. As for Kong Shinmu, he was constantly devouring the power of the statue during the battle, so his perception of space was also constantly growing. For Kong Shinmu, although he had not yet devoured the power of the space essence, after entering the intermediate relic, he had already comprehended a lot of the power of space. Everyone dodged the spatial ripples while attacking the strange statue. Almost every moment, they were on the edge of life and death, surrounded by danger. Fortunately, the 5 of them were the elites of their respective races. Whether it was the Polaris tribes Quan Tianqing or the Bone Imperial tribes Yuhan, they were all the best in their respective tribes in the same realm. Their combat power and perception were very strong. I suspect that many of the young geniuses of the demon god race will not be able to adapt to such a battle. Su Yi suddenly approached Kong Shinmu and sighed to Kong Shinmu. If the content of the intermediate relic's postgraduate entrance examination is like what we encountered, I don't know how many young guys of the demon god race will die in this relic. Hearing this, Kong Shinmu also felt a little emotional. At the same time, he was a little worried about Chu Yueqiang and Shengguan Dai. After all, the difficulty of the statue challenge in the intermediate relic was not low. Not only was it a test of individual strength, but it was also a test of the degree of mutual trust between the 5 people working together. Perhaps in some realms, the 5-man team that faced the statue would already start fighting each other before the statue was activated. This was not impossible. It could even be said that less than half of the geniuses in the White Fog area could sense the hidden existence and attack it. In other words, only half of the geniuses could enter the intermediate relic of the statues. Regardless, our progress should be quite fast. I want to see what other tricks these statues have up their sleeves. Jiang Shenwu now had a desire to challenge himself. No one knew how many changes these statues would have, nor did he know how many rewards these statues would give him. In short, Jiang Shenwu wanted to challenge his own limits. No matter what, Su Yi was one of them. Kong Shinmu and the royal family of the demon god race were in-laws. No matter what, Suyi was one of them. Jiang Shenwu and the demon god royal family were in-laws. As for Yuhan and Quan Tianqing, Jiang Shenwu hoped that they could cooperate well. After all, if they could defeat the statue, it would be beneficial to all five of them. No matter how unlucky they would still be able to obtain space attribute dazzling materials worth at least 30,000 gold dragon coins. If they were lucky like Kong Shinmu and obtained a space attribute dazzling material, it would not just be 30,000 gold dragon coins, but 100,000 gold dragon coins. Apart from obtaining a heaven and earth sacred item, such a reward was already quite generous. It should be known that even 30,000 gold dragon coins could be used to buy a few of the strongest imperial dragon weapons and dragon martial techniques. This was a reward that no one could refuse. Therefore, Kong Shinmu believed that before the final moment arrived, Yuhan and Quan Tianqing would still work together. As for how much effort they would put in, it was not something that Kong Shinmu could control. In short, it was fine as long as they did not cause any trouble. At the final moment, the distribution of benefits would not be so easy. Perhaps they might even turn against each other, but that was a matter for the future. At the very least, everyone had to destroy the statue in front of them first. This was what everyone wanted the most at the moment. The strange statue in front of them constantly emitted spacetime ripples, testing everyone's ability to sense the power of space. If there was a slight mistake, it was very likely that they would die on the spot. Therefore, no one dared to be distracted at all. Kong Shinmu and Suyi only talked for a short while before continuing to attack the strange statue in front of them. Time passed quickly, and even after an hour, no one could find any weakness in the strange statue. On the other hand, Quan Tianqing seemed to be on the verge of exhaustion. His energy was being consumed very quickly, and it was even more difficult for him to recover now. However, he still persisted. Every time Kong Shinmu felt that this guy might not be able to hold on any longer, this guy still persisted, even though he always looked exhausted. This guy has been taking elixirs to recover his energy. Kong Shinmu could see what Quan Tianqing was doing, but he did not think much of it. In this kind of situation, although Kong Shinmu could help him and help him avoid the spacetime ripples, there was no point in having such a useless teammate. Moreover, both sides did not trust each other. In this kind of situation, how could Quan Tianqing ask Kong Shinmu to help him? Therefore, he had to be self-sufficient. He had to recover his energy to continue fighting. This time, Quan Tianqing had taken a lot of elixirs to recover his energy. The total value was probably around 10 to 20,000 gold dragon coins. Of course, as long as they could continue to defeat the statues, his efforts would all be rewarded. As for Kong Shinmu, he did not have to worry about energy consumption. Not only did he dodge the attacks of the spacetime ripples, but he also continuously absorbed the energy of these spacetime ripples. One had to know that these spacetime ripples carried the true power of a supreme expert. Kong Shinmu had only absorbed a very small portion of the power, but he had already gained a lot of insight into space and supreme power. These insights might not be of much use to Kong Shinmu's combat strength in the short term, but it would be very useful for Kong Shinmu's future development. Chapter 49-26. If he could devour all of them, the effect would be unimaginable. It was a pity that Kong Shinmu's level was too low. There was nothing he could do about it. The strange statue continued to attack them with spatial ripples for 2 hours. During this time, Kong Shinmu and the other 4 geniuses did not cause any obvious damage to the strange statue. Their attack seemed to have no effect on the strange statue. It was as if they were attacking an existence that was much stronger than them. This made all of them somewhat puzzled. Could it be that this strange statue did not have a weakness like the previous humanoid statue? Or could it be that they had to wait for a certain time to get rid of this strange statue? No. We have focused our attention on the strange statue itself and neglected other aspects. Have you noticed? At this time, Gu Xinyue suddenly said, "The spatial ripples that attack us, after we dodge them, will continue to attack outwards until they reach the crystal wall at the edge of this crystal palace. I have been paying attention to it before, and now I find that every once in a while, when these spatial ripples attack the crystal wall, they will produce 5 spatial energy condensed bodies. Basically, this happens once every half an hour. I am thinking, should we absorb the 5 spatial energy condensed bodies and use their power to deal with the strange statue?" Hearing Gu Xinyue's words, Yu Han of the Bone Royal family immediately looked around and said, "If it is as you said, it is worth a try." Yu Han of the Bone Royal family was also very meticulous in his observation of the surroundings, but he did not notice Gu Xinyue's discovery. He had also experienced many exploration of intermediate ruins and had different experiences in dealing with different kinds of situations. At this moment, he naturally began to pay attention to what Gu Xinyue said. However, this genius of the Bone Royal family was soon attacked by frequent spatial ripples, which made him a little tired. At this time, Gu Xinyue and the others suddenly said, "After the spatial ripples attack you, I am afraid you did not pay attention to it, but 5 spatial energy condensed bodies have appeared." So that was how it was. It was no wonder that no one had noticed this. That was because every time the condensed form of spatial energy appeared, the strange statue would attack them more frequently. No one noticed anything amiss, because everyone was focused on dodging the strange statue's attack. Now that Gu Xinyue had brought this up, it was obvious that she had noticed it from the beginning. This girl's observation skills were quite meticulous. Moreover, this meant that when Gu Xinyue was dodging those spatial ripples, she still held back. Otherwise, how could she have noticed the details that the others hadn't? Even Kang Xinmu was a little careless. He was so focused on finding the weakness of the strange statue that he forgot to pay attention to his surroundings. Since that's the case, let's each absorb a piece of spatial energy and try to attack this strange statue. Kang Xinmu immediately shuttled towards the spatial energy condensed bodies and appeared next to one of them. Then, he raised his hand and released a pitch-black devouring force that enveloped the condensed body. Immediately, Kang Xinmu felt that this spatial energy condensed body contained some kind of different power, but he couldn't tell what kind of power it was. It was also the void power of the space attribute, but it seemed to have a destructive effect on the strange statue. Kang Xinmu didn't think too much about it. He directly used the power of the spatial energy condensed body to sweep towards the strange statue. He directly used this power to perform the 9th stage ultimate dragon burst, which was a familiar method for Kang Xinmu. Wasn't it just devouring other people's power to deal with them? Kang Xinmu was very familiar with it. But it might not be easy for others. In any case, Kang Xinmu used this kind of power to explode with the 9th stage ultimate dragon burst and directly bombarded the strange statue's right arm. That extremely long right arm of the statue was directly blasted into pieces by Kang Xinmu's 9th stage ultimate dragon burst. This was the first time they had caused damage to the strange statue, and it seemed like that was indeed the case. Gu Xinyue's guess was right. However, after Kang Xinmu launched this attack, the power of the spatial energy condensed body that he had devoured disappeared. This power was only enough for Kang Xinmu to launch one attack. But he discovered that he couldn't devour the other spatial energy condensed bodies around him. It seemed like the other condensed bodies were prepared for others. Most importantly, Jiang Shenwu realized that even though his attack had destroyed the right arm of the strange statue, the right arm actually recovered after a short while. It was as good as new, and the whole process did not take more than 3 breaths of time. This strange statue was too tough, and its regenerative ability was also extremely terrifying. It seems like before, we need to attack at the same time. Kang Xinmu said. That's right, but, although Kang Xinmu, you've already tried it, it's very difficult for us to use this power to launch our own attacks. Suyi quickly transmitted a message with a somewhat bitter smile. In truth, she and the other three were in a similar situation, that was, they simply didn't know how to integrate this power into their own martial arts attacks. Kang Xinmu had long since become accustomed to this kind of method because he had the devouring power. But the others had not tried it at all. And it was basically impossible to absorb this power on the spot. The master of this supreme relic had given them another difficult problem. No matter what, this was a hurdle that they had to overcome. Even Kang Xinmu couldn't help them. Fortunately, this method wasn't too difficult, they only needed to try a few times to learn it. The condensed spatial energy could only last for 7 breaths of time at most. After 7 breaths of time, this power would dissipate, and they could only wait for the next condensed body to appear after an incense stick's time. If that was the case, they would need at least a few more hours to successfully break through this strange statue, and this was already the most ideal situation. Therefore, Kang Xinmu pondered for a moment and directly decided, how about this, while avoiding the spatial ripples, all of you try to use my power to attack this statue, consider it as training your ability to use other powers. This will save us time. Chapter 49-27. As soon as Kang Xinmu finished speaking, he released the spatial power he had just devoured. Of course, he would not take out his devouring power for others to experiment with. Since he was using spatial power to attack the strange statue, Kang Xinmu would use spatial power to familiarize the other 4 with it. Soon, the 4 spatial powers that Kang Xinmu released were all absorbed by Gu Xinyue and the others. Then, they all tried to use the power that Kang Xinmu had given them to release martial skills while avoiding the spatial ripples. Whether it was Quan Tianxing, Yuhan, Suyi, or Gu Xinyue, they were all in a very tense state. Not only did they have to avoid the spatial ripples, but they also had to try to use the power of others to activate martial skills. On the other hand, Kang Xinmu was a little free. After all, just avoiding the spatial ripples was no longer difficult for Kang Xinmu. Now, Kang Xinmu was basically dodging the spatial ripples while devouring the power contained in the spatial ripples. Whether it was a supreme level power or a pure spatial power, it was a great improvement for Kang Xinmu. Of course, the improvement to his current combat strength was not very big. After all, he was mainly a dragon warrior. However, why did Kang Xinmu feel that when he left this intermediate ruins, his understanding of spatial void power would be several times better than before? If he absorbed the power of spatial condensation, the level of Kang Xinmu's inheritance of void power would probably surpass that of the dragon warrior. At this moment, Gu Xinyue and the other 3 kept trying. At first, they used the power that Kang Xinmu had given them, but the martial skills they displayed were extremely clumsy. They could not even display a tenth of their own strength. This was because it indeed required training, and generally speaking, no one would use this ability. Only when others were willing to give you power could you take it for yourself and use it to display your own skills. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible for them to seize the opponent's power to display their skills. Therefore, the 4 of them had never tried this ability before. However, as they continued to consume the power that Kang Xinmu had given them, they became more and more proficient in this Tao. The next chance is coming. Everyone, get ready. Kang Xinmu reminded them. Immediately, the other 4 became nervous. At the very least, they focused their attention on the space attribute condensation. However, Suyi reminded them, don't be too careless. When spatial energy condenses appear, the speed at which the spatial ripples are released will increase. We will be attacked even faster, so be careful. Her words weren't wrong. Avoiding the spatial ripples was the most important thing. They absolutely couldn't be distracted and get hit by the spatial ripples. Once hit, the result would be death. And if one of them died, they might not be able to destroy this strange statue, therefore, nothing must happen to the 5 of them. Kang Xinmu was currently the most free one, so he was paying attention to the passage of time. When the moment was about to arrive, he directly reminded them. Sure enough, he remembered the time very accurately. Following his reminder, the spatial ripples of the strange statue suddenly became more violent. Endless spatial ripples erupted in all directions. Everyone began to travel through the void to dodge. The power of these spatial ripples directly impacted the crystal walls of the surrounding crystal palace, and then condensed into 5 pieces of spatial energy. 5 pieces of spatial energy completely erupted at this moment. The 5 of them almost simultaneously swept towards the condensation. Then, each of them absorbed the power of one of the spatial condensations and dispersed as quickly as possible. Even now, Yuhan and Quan Tianqing still didn't trust Kang Xinmu and the other 2 very much. Therefore, when they approached each other, they quickly distanced themselves. Of course, Kang Xinmu didn't have any objections. In any case, it was fine as long as it didn't hinder them from destroying the statue. Then, among the 5 of them, except for Kang Xinmu, the others used methods they weren't very familiar with to explode the power of the spatial condensation. The power they released was basically only about 50% of their full power. The 4 of them were all top-notch geniuses. Under this kind of test, their progress was about the same. Then, the power of the 5 of them blasted the strange statue almost at the same time. Then, everyone saw that the strange statue's body was indeed blasted into pieces. Success. Everyone tensed up and became nervous. But soon, they found that the strange statue was still recovering. The body of the statue that had been smashed was constantly reassembling, and it seemed that it would soon be completely restored to its original state. Looks like the power isn't enough. Kang Xinmu's expression darkened. Gu Xinyue also said with some self-blame, I didn't perform well. I only used 50% of the power of the spatial condensation. Us too. Quan Tianqing also sighed. We can only continue to work hard. Next time, we should be able to explode with 70% to 80% of our power. Let's see if we can directly destroy this strange statue. Just as the 5 of them expected, their combined attack this time was not powerful enough. Therefore, they couldn't destroy the strange statue in one fell swoop. To destroy the defense of this strange statue, it was necessary to have a strong attack. The 5 of them were all at the peak of the imperial realm. If they could only use half of their strength, they really wouldn't be able to destroy this statue. Perhaps the owner of this supreme relic needed them to reach a higher level, so everyone had to exert more strength. Based on the current situation, Kang Xinmu felt that if it weren't the 5 of them but other ordinary demon god clan cultivators, it would really be difficult for them to break through this level. Among the 200 people who participated in this mid-level relic, there were probably less than 20% who could pass this level. It was already quite good that 30 or 40 people could pass this level of the strange statue. Of course, Kang Xinmu also didn't know what kind of situation the others were facing. Now, everything was just a guess. Therefore, they had to continue and move forward in order to have a chance of meeting other cultivators. Then, everyone continued to train, and the most difficult thing was to dodge the spatial ripples at the same time. Once again, after the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, another opportunity finally came. The 5 of them exploded the power of their spatial condensation. This time, each of them exploded with at least 70% of their power. He observed the other places inside the golden treasure box and discovered that there were 2 gems embedded in the starry sky above the 2 grasslands. Of the 2 gems, one was shaped like the moon, and the other was shaped like the sun. The space inside the golden treasure box was spherical, and the 10,000 feet paper between the 2 grasslands was slowly rotating. If the 2 gems did not move, one could see the sun rising and setting, the moon rising and setting on the grassland. This was a simulation of a small world. Looks like the key lies in those 2 gems. One is a moon-shaped gem, and the other is a sun-shaped gem. I wonder what these two gems are. There's a 99% chance that these two gems are the reason why living things can exist inside the golden treasure box. Kang Xinmu thought that if he took these two gems out, they would probably be extremely valuable. However, he felt that he had never heard of a space that could accommodate living things. It would be too much of a waste to take the gems out just like that. Regarding this, he decided to ask the demon god ancestor and the black dragon's consciousness. This was all an exchange of consciousness, so it didn't take up much time. Kang Xinmu observed the situation inside the golden treasure box and directly asked the black dragon's consciousness and the demon god ancestor's consciousness, "Seniors, have you seen something like this before? This is a space that can accommodate living things." "Of course I've seen it before." The demon god ancestor answered indifferently. "In fact, in the era that I lived in, this kind of thing wasn't too precious. Of course, it wasn't something that ordinary people could have. Only the top experts could have similar treasures. This kind of spatial treasure can form a world of its own that can allow living things to live inside. Some clans even have their headquarters in such a small world. Even, your hometown, the Dragon Martial Continent, is a similar small world. It's just that the small world of the Dragon Martial Continent is much bigger than the small world you have now. The sun and moon of the Dragon Martial Continent were also created by humans. Don't you realize that? That's not a real star, just like this spatial treasure you've just obtained." Just these words alone were enough to shock Kang Xinmu. However, he had already expected this, so even though the demon god ancestor had told him the truth, he wasn't too shocked. The Dragon Martial Continent is a similar small world. The front is the Dragon Martial Continent, where you live. The back is a barren land that has been silent for a long time. In the small world where the Dragon Martial Continent is, there are also moon-shaped gems and sun-shaped gems. We call these two gems world stones. Only with a pair of complete world stones can a small world be created, and this small world can contain life. With this small world in the golden treasure box, you can say that you have a small world. You can even put all your friends in it and let them live inside. The core is the world stone. World stones are extremely rare. I didn't think that there would be such a treasure in this place, but this treasure is incomplete. This is not only a small world, but also a sacred item of heaven and earth. The owner of this mid-level relic is definitely not ordinary. It might even be the original body of some ancient big shot. Was it a relic left behind by a demon god ancestor? This was a relic that could pass down the legacy of a powerful clan like the demon god royal family. Kang Xinmu was a little surprised. He didn't think that this could be the relic of such a powerful existence. Moreover, the words of the demon god ancestor had shocked Kang Xinmu. This golden treasure box could be a small world, a sacred item of heaven and earth. The combination of the two. In other words, Kang Xinmu could use this golden treasure box to fight. What is the name of this golden treasure box? It's an excellent material for creating illusions, and it has the power of space. According to your current value, it's worth at least 300,000 gold dragon coins. So expensive? Kang Xinmu was a little surprised. He didn't expect that he would need such expensive materials to create the illusion inside the golden treasure box. He had never seen such an expensive material in the Five Extremes Dark Ice Holy Land, and the most expensive one was only 100,000 gold dragon coins. Just like the Splendor Gem, that thing's value was only a tenth of this so-called psychedelic astral crystal. Was it really that exaggerated? The ancestor demon god's consciousness said proudly, if it really is a psychedelic astral crystal, perhaps even 300,000 gold dragon coins wouldn't be enough. This is a rare material for creating illusions. Even in this lord's era, the psychedelic astral crystal was completely out of print. It can't be seen in the outside world. You should know that for cultivators who specialize in illusions, the psychedelic astral crystal can amplify the power of illusions by several times. It's the strongest illusion-type treasure in the world. Do you think its value can be measured in gold dragon coins? If you ask me, this thing's value is no lower than a world saint item. So powerful? Kong Shinmu was confused by the consciousnesses of these two seniors. Was this psychedelic astral crystal really that valuable? Perhaps. In my era, there were quite a few psychedelic astral crystals. The Black Dragon's consciousness said, "Little demon god, although your era isn't too long ago, it's still the ancient era compared to now. Since it's already out of print in the ancient era, this psychedelic astral crystal is naturally a priceless treasure in the current era." The Black Dragon's consciousness actually called the ancestor demon god, Little Demon God. This made Kong Shinmu not know whether to laugh or cry. But looking at their respective seniority, it seemed like there really wasn't a problem with this form of address. In any case, up to this point, Kong Shinmu had completely understood. This golden treasure box wasn't much. It was just a replica of a world saint item. What was truly valuable was the psychedelic astral crystal inside the treasure box. Although this thing was produced quite a bit in the Black Dragon's era, it was already out of print in the ancestor demon god's era. In the current era, it was a treasure among treasures. At the very least, even the ancestor demon god couldn't tell that the world inside the golden treasure box was an illusion. How powerful was the power of this psychedelic astral crystal? To Kong Shinmu, this might not be something too precious, because it wasn't of much use to him. He wasn't a psychedelic-type cultivator, but its devouring power seemed to be able to devour everything. Perhaps, he could really use this psychedelic astral crystal. I'll give it a try when I get back. If it doesn't work, I'll give it to Gu Xinyue. Isn't she a nightmare mirage dragon? If she had the psychedelic astral crystal, her strength would probably increase by several folds. Of course, that's only for living creatures. After all, illusions were useless against inanimate objects. Just like the two statues they were dealing with before them, after Kong Shinmu finished studying the item he had obtained, he raised his head and saw that the other four were still examining the item he had obtained. Gu Xinyue, what did you get? Kong Shinmu approached Gu Xinyue and asked her. It's a spatial attribute radiant material. But I've never seen this type before. I don't know what it's used for, nor its value. Gu Xinyue showed the item she had obtained to Kong Shinmu with some distress. It was a spatial crystal that seemed to be constantly changing forms. It contained some strange power. But I'm guessing that this item should be more valuable than the radiant material we obtained previously. Chapter 49-30. Gu Xinyue did not know what it was, but the two experts' consciousnesses in Kong Shinmu's mind could tell. Kong Shinmu immediately asked the two experts' consciousnesses, "What kind of material is this?" The demon god ancestor's consciousness answered, "This is a formless crystal. It's considered a relatively high-grade spatial attribute material. After a battle weapon is illuminated by the formless crystal, it will have the ability to change its form. The offensive and defensive battle runes in the battle weapon can be transformed into each other." So powerful? Kong Shinmu could not help but feel shocked. If that was the case, wouldn't the effect of the formless crystal be extremely powerful? It's powerful, but it's not that powerful either, because there aren't many battle weapons that are suitable for the formless crystal. The demon god ancestor continued to explain, for example, if your Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon seal is illuminated by the formless crystal, it won't have any effect at all. This is because your Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon seal only has defensive battle runes. Even if you want to transform it, you need to exist to transform it. Therefore, after your Phantom Ghost book is illuminated by the formless crystal, it can transform between offensive, concealment, and void battle runes, but the total number of battle runes won't change. Normally, if you want to illuminate the formless crystal, you need to forge a battle weapon specifically. It can be said to be custom-made. This is because the formless crystal is very powerful and can transform into the forms of various battle runes. Therefore, you need to customize a battle weapon with more battle runes. Normally, such a battle weapon doesn't exist at all. No one would use such a battle weapon with too many different functions. Take you for example. Even the most top-notch heaven-ranked divine dragon weapon can only have 800 battle runes at most. If these 800 battle runes are divided into 8 types, each type will only have 100 battle runes. This individual effect can't even compare to the lowest-ranked divine dragon weapon. It's not strong in attack or defense, and its other abilities are definitely not strong either. Therefore, no one would forge such a battle weapon. Only the formless crystal. Someone who obtained the formless crystal was able to forge a battle weapon like this and use the formless crystal to illuminate it. We also have a special name for this kind of soldier, which is formless soldier. It's very difficult to forge a formless weapon. I wonder if there are any battle weapon blacksmiths who can forge 8 battle runes in your era. Back then, our limit was to fuse 9 battle runes into a battle weapon, which was a top-notch formless weapon. It's definitely more difficult to fuse more battle runes into a battle weapon. Kid, even though the blacksmith who created your illusionary ghost tome has fused 3 types of battle runes into it, it's only the most basic stage of the fusion. If a truly powerful blacksmith were to fuse 3 types of battle runes, he would be able to increase the number of battle runes for each type of battle runes, thereby increasing the total number of battle runes in the battle weapon. Kid, you haven't come into contact with blacksmiths before, right? It's much more difficult to improve in this line of work than it is for you to cultivate. Many blacksmiths cultivate bitterly for decades in order to improve their skills. This is something that you can't understand. What you mainly need is the tempering and experience of battles, but blacksmiths need experience and money. If you want to improve your blacksmithing skills, necessary practice is indispensable. If you want to practice, you naturally need materials. Blacksmiths consume a lot of materials, so even in my era, there were very few high-level blacksmiths. Blacksmiths are divided into 9 grades. Those who can reach the 3rd grade can forge Supreme Expert's battle weapons. The middle 3 grades are the advancement of blacksmiths. They can forge more battle weapons with more battle runes and better quality. There are very few blacksmiths in the top 3 grades. Only blacksmiths in the top 3 grades can forge battle weapons that are suitable for the formless crystal. Do you know any powerful blacksmiths? The ancestor demon god's thoughts left Kong Shinmu dumbfounded. Although the formless crystal sounded amazing, it actually had so many restrictions. Indeed, if Jiang Shenwu were to use the formless crystal on the virtual ghost book, he would certainly be able to obtain a pretty good dragon weapon that could switch between offensive battle runes, concealment battle runes, and void battle runes. However, according to the ancestor demon god, it would be a great waste if he used the formless crystal on the phantom ghost book. According to the ancestor demon god, if he wanted to use the formless crystal, it must be a custom-made battle weapon with more than 6 types of battle runes. Otherwise, it would be a waste. In the era when the ancestor demon god lived, the formless crystal was extremely valuable. It was even ranked in the top 3 among all the materials for dazzling. Of course, Kong Shinmu did not know the value of the formless crystal now. Therefore, Kong Shinmu picked out the more important ones and explained them to Gu Xinyue. Finally, he said, Gu Xinyue, I have a psychedelic astral crystal here. If you don't need the formless crystal, I can exchange it with you. To be honest, Kong Shinmu was tempted. He was quite interested in the formless crystal. The value of the formless crystal was not high, but if he could really forge a formless weapon that was suitable for dazzling the formless crystal, it would be extremely terrifying for Kong Shinmu to improve his battle strength. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was the strongest battle weapon in the world. Of course, it was not in terms of power, but in terms of comprehensive ability. The formless weapon that was dazzled by the formless crystal could be used in any situation. It was not limited to defense, attack, or concealment. When needed, the formless weapon could be used for defense, attack, and concealment. It could even have a variety of different effects. There was no need to say more about the power of this battle weapon. The only thing he needed to worry about was whether Kang Xinmu could find a suitable blacksmith. According to the consciousness of the ancestor demon god, only the top 3 blacksmiths could cast the formless crystal. According to the current situation of the dragon gods, if there were top 3 blacksmiths, their status must be very high, right? It was even possible that it was more noble than Emperor Shi and the divine dragon. This gave Jiang Shenwu a headache. But no matter what, the formless crystal seemed to be very precious and hard to come by, and perhaps no one would be able to recognize its value in the outside world. So it was not bad for Kang Xinmu to get the formless crystal. Gu Xinyue now knew the situation of the formless crystal, and she also knew that it was very difficult to use the formless crystal. Chapter 49-31. The psychedelic astral crystal was worth at least 300,000 gold coins. Furthermore, to a psychedelic cultivator, its value was immeasurable. Gu Xinyue was an inheritor of the nightmare illusionary dragon's bloodline. She had a great need for the psychedelic astral crystal. Therefore, Gu Xinyue did not think for too long. The material that was worth more than 300,000 yuan was a priceless treasure to her. As for the formless crystal, it was a dream that she would never be able to fulfill in her lifetime. How could it be easy for her to find a top-grade blacksmith? Kang Xinmu could still rely on his relationship with Emperor Shi's mystical dragon to find a blacksmith of that level. But Gu Xinyue did not have such a wide circle of friends. Her circle of friends was several levels lower than that of a top-grade blacksmith. Therefore, there was no other way. Moreover, since it was Kang Xinmu who proposed the exchange, Gu Xinyue did not want to go against Kang Xinmu's wishes. Alright, then let's exchange. Both the formless crystal and the psychedelic astral crystal were treasures that were rarely seen in the outside world. Their value was immeasurable. To Kang Xinmu, the formless crystal was already a good harvest. The space-condensed crystal was worth more than 100,000 gold coins. If Kang Xinmu wanted to keep it for himself, he would have to give 30%, which was at least 30,000 gold coins, to the demon god race. Thinking of this, Kang Xinmu felt a headache coming on. The demon god race had invited him for this operation. If not for their invitation, he would not have had the chance to get these things. Therefore, Kang Xinmu did not intend to renege on his debt. Giving 30% of the harvest to the demon god race was a must. However, he did not know how much the demon god race would ask for the formless crystal and space-condensed crystal. Of course, regarding this problem, Kang Xinmu had an idea. This idea was suggested by the demon god ancestor so that he would not be at a disadvantage when it came to splitting the price. And this idea made Kang Xinmu exclaim in admiration, "This was a story for another time." At this moment, Kang Xinmu and Gu Xinyue were exchanging their loot in the Crystal Palace. However, neither of them intended to use the two items directly. Kang Xinmu took out the psychedelic astral crystal from the golden treasure box. Then, the illusions within the golden treasure box all disappeared, condensing into a starry blue dreamy crystal. This was the psychedelic astral crystal. After Gu Xinyue obtained the psychedelic star crystal, she was obviously very excited. This thing was simply too beneficial to her. Right now, she was suffering from not having a suitable dragon weapon to illuminate. One must know that she was about to step into the level of a super mystical dragon. If she wasted such a good material on a divine spirit dragon weapon, it would be a pity. She wanted to find a transcendent divine dragon weapon, but unfortunately, with her current wealth, she could not afford a top-notch transcendent divine dragon weapon. That was something even her father didn't have. For her, it was something that she could only dream of, but it was beyond her reach. A transcendent divine dragon weapon was worth a lot more than a divine spirit dragon weapon. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was 10 times more expensive. For those top-notch transcendent divine dragon weapons, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to sell them for 1,000,000 gold dragon coins. Hence, Gu Xinyue was both excited and troubled at the same time. Where was she going to get 1,000,000 gold dragon coins? She wasn't like Kang Xinmu, who could get a heaven and earth sacred item that cost more than 1,000,000 gold dragon coins. She felt that she wouldn't be that lucky. No matter what, Gu Xinyue's loot this time was already pretty good. As long as she could get out of this alive, it wouldn't be a loss. Hence, she still had to continue. A spatial door has appeared over there. Let me go in and take a look first. After all, my defense is slightly stronger. Kang Xinmu pointed to the back of the Crystal Palace. There, a spatial door had just opened, and it seemed to lead to another area of the mid-grade ruins. In other words, the cooperation test to challenge the statues seemed to have ended for now. Kang Xinmu wasn't sure what would happen next. His defense was the strongest, so he might as well go and take a look first. Okay. Be careful. Su Yi and Gu Xinyue both nodded at Kang Xinmu. As for Yuhan and Quan Tianqing, they were also checking the loot they got. Judging from their expressions, the loot they got this time was pretty good as well. It seemed that the reward for killing the second creepy statue was pretty good. Just this trip alone was enough to make everyone feel that it was a worthwhile trip. If there were even better rewards, it would drive everyone crazy. Not everyone could get a golden treasure box like Kang Xinmu did, so many people didn't know that there was a heaven and earth sacred item in this mid-grade ruin. If they knew, they would probably go crazy for it. Now, Kang Xinmu knew about it. Of course, he wouldn't reveal it to others, not even to Gu Xinyue and Su Yi. After all, the information he knew wasn't completely true. What if the situation in the golden treasure box was just an illusion and didn't mean that there was such a heaven and earth sacred item in this mid-grade ruin? In that case, wouldn't he be spreading the wrong information? Therefore, Kang Xinmu went directly to the next level. The other 4 people waited where they were, while Kang Xinmu transformed into a black divine dragon and displayed the divine dragon tyrant body technique's defensive posture, ready to activate the power of the brilliant gem at any time. Then, Kang Xinmu went through the space door. As his eyes lit up, he didn't sense any dangerous aura. What appeared in front of him was an even bigger crystal palace. In the center of this crystal palace, there was an even bigger human statue. This human-shaped statue was almost 3,000 feet tall. The entire crystal palace was like an incomparably spacious space. Even though this human-shaped statue was sitting there, it still looked like an endless space. It was incomparably vast. Is he going to challenge another statue? Jiang Shenwu's mood immediately relaxed. If it was the same challenge to the statue, other than the form, there shouldn't be any difference, right? As long as he didn't face any unknown danger, it would be fine. After Kang Xinmu had a clear understanding of the situation, he retreated to the space door behind him. It was still the same crystal palace as before. He looked at the other 4 people and said, "The next level is still a cooperation test. There's a 3,000 feet tall human statue. We might have to face a statue that's even more difficult to deal with. Or a statue." After Yuhan and Quan Tianqing looked at each other, they nodded their heads. Chapter 49-32. Kang Xinmu also understood Yuhan's and Quan Tianqing's concerns, so he nodded at them and said, "You guys can go ahead first. I will follow behind you with the 2 of them." It was obvious that Kang Xinmu had just gone through and returned safely without any danger. Hence, there was nothing suspicious about letting Yuhan and Quan Tianxing go first. Therefore, Yuhan and Quan Tianxing nodded and flew through the space gate together. Meanwhile, Kang Xinmu led Gu Xinyue and Su Yi through the spatial door. As the five of them passed through the spatial door, the five of them realized at the same time that the spatial door behind them disappeared. Immediately after, the five of them became a little nervous. This time, they even divided up the work. Kang Xinmu and Gu Xinyue stared at the 3-kilometer-tall human-shaped statue in the center of the large crystal palace, while the others paid attention to their surroundings and prepared for any unexpected situations. However, what shocked them was, they had been on guard for close to half an hour, but they didn't notice anything strange happening in the entire space. The human-shaped statue didn't move, and nothing else appeared in the surrounding space. They were a little confused. Could it be that we need to attack this statue first? Quan Tianxing said mischievously as he looked at the human-shaped statue in the center with an eager expression. Kang Xinmu stopped him in time. Not necessarily. We don't have to rush. What I find strange is that this space is too big and too vast. The human-shaped statue is also 3 kilometers tall, which is several times bigger than the previous ones. I have a feeling that, this palace might not be for the five of us to challenge. After hearing what Kang Xinmu said, everyone's expressions changed slightly. I just thought of that too. Yuhan nodded and said in a low voice, I'm afraid that more challengers will come to this space. The reason why we have nothing to do here is because the other challengers haven't been able to defeat the previous 2 statues. To be exact, it should be a statue. Or rather, it should be 2 different stages of a statue. Su Yi added, after the weakness of the first humanoid statue was broken by us, it turned into the second strange statue. However, the 2 are actually the same statue, aren't they? The 3,000 zhang tall humanoid statue we're facing now is the real second statue. Our partners, or competitors, will probably surprise us. Moreover, no one knows the rules of this crystal palace. Will it not be a test of cooperation, but a test of competition? Or a survival test? Su Ye's guesses were all possible. Gu Xinyue nodded and said, if it's a cooperative test, then it's easy. We just have to cooperate well. If it's a competitive test, will our team compete with other teams, or will it be a free competition? It can't be free competition. Yuhan shook his head and said, I have more experience. In this case, if it was a free competition, there wouldn't be a test of cooperation like the previous checkpoint. Therefore, if it's not a test of cooperation, it will be a team competition mode. Of course, it's more likely to be a survival test. I think it's more likely to be a survival test. The so-called survival test was in a space. As long as they could survive, they would be able to get the final reward. Kang Xinmu looked at the giant statue in the center of the field and felt that it might really be a survival test, and I think it's likely to be a team survival test. Su Yi narrowed his eyes and guessed, if it's a team survival test, then among the 5 of us, the death of any one of us will be counted as a failure. Therefore, if it's really a team survival test, we must help each other. It's likely that there will be a concentrated attack on one person. At that time, the others must help, otherwise, none of us will get more rewards. This guess was quite reasonable. Since nothing had happened, Kang Xinmu and the others gathered together to discuss the possible situations that might occur next. For the next 4 hours, they kept discussing and came up with a total of more than 10 possibilities. The probability of the subsequent possibilities was not much different from the team survival test. For every possible situation, everyone had made countermeasures and prepared to act. Finally, after they came to this large crystal palace for 4 hours, as a space door opened, the 5 people's minds were all attracted by the direction of the space door. Sure enough, there are other teams. I don't know if they will cooperate with us in the test, or compete with us. Or will they carry out a survival test with us? Let's see who will appear first. The 5 people were in a good mood. At least for the upcoming challenge, they had discussed for more than 4 hours and considered all kinds of possibilities, so they were quite well prepared. Perhaps this was the reward for being the fastest to defeat the previous statue. And at this moment, they looked at the space door, and then from the space door, a touch of fire appeared. The first thing that appeared in front of Kang Shinmu and the others was the figure of a fire phoenix, flying out of the space door. Murong Lieni of the ancient Phoenix clan. The corners of Kang Shinmu's mouth curled up slightly. Sure enough, it was her. Among so many people, the strongest that Kang Shinmu knew was Murong Lieni. The others, including Huang Yun, were slightly weaker. Even if the team could not do it, Kang Shinmu believed that Murong Lieni's personal ability was enough to lead the team to defeat the 2 forms of the previous statue. After defeating the 2 statues, they would be able to enter this large crystal palace. As Murong Lieni appeared in the form of a fire phoenix, behind her appeared someone familiar to Kang Shinmu. Chapter 49-33. The rules of the test were still unclear, but Quan Tianqing wasn't too worried. According to the analysis of the previous discussion, it would most likely be a test of team survival or teamwork. Basically, there wouldn't be any random fights. Murong Lieni and Chu Yueqiang were the second team to arrive in this space. The third team didn't take too long to arrive. In the time it took to brew a cup of tea, they appeared in another direction. It was the demon god race's top expert, Huang Yun, and the number 1 genius of the Bone Imperial race. It's Jing Luo. When Yuhan saw the genius youth of the Bone Imperial race, her expression changed. Jing Luo and Huang Yun are actually in the same team. Their team looks very strong. Kang Shinmu narrowed his eyes. Jing Luo was a name he had heard before entering the mid-grade relic. When he arrived outside the mid-grade relic and fought against the subterranean creatures for 3 days, he had heard this name many times. This was the top expert of the Bone Imperial race. In terms of combat power, he was definitely not weaker than Huang Yun. He was probably in existence comparable to Murong Lieni. His combat power was terrifying, mainly because he had an unsealed Heaven and Earth Saint treasure. A Heaven and Earth Saint treasure was already hard to come by, let alone someone who could unseal one of its seals. One could imagine how terrifying Jing Luo's strength was. Of course, a Heaven and Earth Saint treasure couldn't be used all the time, but even if it was used at a crucial moment, it was enough to turn the tide. Kang Shinmu's blood rose fan was given to Xiao Bai, Ran Ran, and Xiao Yuhua, so he didn't bring it with him. Moreover, his blood rose fan seal had not been unsealed. Even if he brought it, it wouldn't be able to unleash much power. It wouldn't be as strong as a 9th stage ultimate Dao Hui Dragon explosion. After all, Kang Shinmu already had the battle power of a peak emperor. Before the blood rose fan seal was unsealed, its peak battle power would only be that of a peak emperor. Therefore, Kang Shinmu didn't need to worry about that. The arrival of Jing Luo and Huang Yun caused some people to heave a sigh of relief. The main reason was that Jing Luo and Huang Yun finally had another expert from the North Star tribe. This made Quan Tianqing feel rather gratified. At this time, there were a total of 15 people in the field. Among these 15 people, there were 3 dragon warriors, namely Kang Shinmu, Gu Xinyue and Chu Yueqiang. The demon god race had the most people. Other than Su Yi and Huang Yun, there were 5 of them. There were 3 from the Bone Imperial family, Yuhan, Jing Luo, and the genius from the Bone Imperial family who followed Murong Lieni's team. There were 2 from the Polaris tribe and 2 from the ancient Phoenix clan. Besides Murong Lieni, there was another genius of the ancient Phoenix clan who had followed Jing Luo and Huang Yun. Under such circumstances, it could be said that the Demon God clan was the strongest, followed by the Dragon God clan and the Bone Imperial clan. The North Star tribe and the Ancient Phoenix clan seemed to be the weakest, but in reality, that was not the case. At this time, a peak existence like Murong Lieni could almost be compared to the other three. An ordinary genius like Chu Yueqiang was not a match for Murong Lieni even if the three of them worked together. Therefore, it was not too accurate to say which side was the strongest overall. However, there wasn't much point in counting this, because when the 15 people from the three teams were teleported into this huge crystal palace, the 3-kilometer-tall humanoid statue in the entire space finally moved. Translator, Zephizi editor, Dioquin. The statue was originally sitting cross-legged in this space. As the people from the three teams arrived, the human-shaped statue immediately stood up. With a casual movement, ripples appeared in the surrounding space, causing the expressions of the 15 people from the three teams to change slightly. Everyone began to prepare. No matter what happened next, it was bound to be a battle of life and death. It was also a battle that could bring them great benefits. No matter what the battle method was, as long as they performed as best they could, they might be able to obtain some benefits later on. Previously, the human statue and the strange statue had already given the 15 people a taste of sweetness. Although the rewards were not too many or too good, the statue was only the beginning. This 3,000 zhang tall humanoid statue was the real highlight of the show. The statue is moving. Be careful of the spatial vortex. Jiang Shenwu immediately sensed the space around him. The power of a spatial vortex had started to appear, causing him to feel nervous. Then, everyone realized that these spatial vortexes were not targeting them. When the human statue gradually stood up, the entire giant space was directly divided into three separate spaces. It was similar to the time when they faced the strange statue. But this time, there were three spaces that separated the three teams that appeared here. We are separated. Kang Xinmu and the others looked at each other and then nodded. It seemed to be similar to what they had guessed before. This should be a team survival test. If it was a team survival test, the five of them had to take care of each other. Once one of them died, it was very likely that they would fail. Moreover, what puzzled them was that if it was a team survival test, why did they have to work together with the other two teams? Could it be that there was some kind of explanation and the existence of more rules? The spatial vortex that Kang Xinmu had sensed just now appeared directly above the three areas. In the entire large crystal palace, a total of 3 spatial vortexes had appeared. Each spatial vortex seemed to contain very strong energy, and no one knew what was brewing. Just as everyone was puzzled, some lights suddenly appeared from the spatial vortexes above their heads. After these lights lit up, they swept out from the spatial vortexes. It's a statue. 3 statues. Kang Xinmu's expression changed slightly. He raised his head and saw that the spatial vortexes above his head were actually 3 human statues, each of which seemed to be thousands of zhang tall. Moreover, there were 3 statues in each area, so there were a total of 9 statues. Every team had to face 3 statues at the same time, and these 3 statues were similar to the human statues they had encountered before. Moreover, it could be seen that these 9 human statues each had 5 places that emitted light. Those represented their weaknesses.